red light is on. The only apology I've received is from Alicia.
And he has delegated his vote to Mr McGuigan, whose desk.
Yeah, Philip was there. Okay. And is Gemma on?
No, there she is.
There is. Excellent. Thanks very much indeed. Any declarations of interest? Okay. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, chairperson's business. I would just like to sort of pass on my condolences and with any other comments from the committee to the Curry family, and particularly Austin Curry. I'd also like to make a declaration that he knew my father fairly well, and I knew him quite a long time ago. And it was somebody that I had a lot of respect for. Mightn't necessarily have agreed with his political stance on some things, but I had a lot of respect for him and what he did and everything. And I think I would like to pass on my condolences to the family, and I would like that to pass that on from that committee as well, if we were so agreed. Agreed? Thank you very much indeed. And moving on to the next item, the Department of Finance 2021 Annual Report and Accounts. Peter has circulated a copy of the Department's annual reports and accounts for 2021. It is understood that this has been issued much later than usual, owing to the Northern Ireland Audit Office consideration of a number of matters. Further to this, the Northern Ireland Audit Office has qualified its opinion in regard to 3 issues. Firstly, the Audit Office reports instances of businesses which have received COVID funding contrary to the eligibility criteria set out in the scheme legislation. However, the Audit Office has been unable to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence to determine whether this expenditure is free from material misstatement and irregularity. This is because information to verify eligibility under certain criteria was not available. Secondly, the NIO has, Northern Ireland Audit Office has qualified its audit opinion in respect to LRSS payments error. And thirdly, the Audit Office has also reported that the Department has classified 47.68 million of grant expenditure as an accrual. The Audit Office considers this amount should be recorded as a provision, and has therefore also qualified its opinion in this regard. And we have had some correspondence from the Minister and from the Department that's just arrived just before the meeting started. However, I think it would be appropriate if the committee members had a chance to review and consider that. So I think one of the things I would like to do is, and I might discuss this with the Vice Chair afterwards, but if we want to consider writing to the Department for further details after having considering that correspondence that we've just received, I think that would be appropriate if you were agreed. Agreed. The other thing I would like to do is also like to write to the Department suggesting that as a matter of course, we should be, as a committee, should be informed if the accounts are being qualified. To find out at this stage that the accounts are being qualified, I think it doesn't sort of, to me, because I want to see about more openness and transparency. If there was concern, no matter what that concern was, that accounts were being qualified, I think it would be appropriate if the committee was informed of those, because it's our job to carry out a scrutiny role, and to find out that the accounts of the Department for Finance have been qualified, I think is an area of some concern. So I think I would like to write on behalf of the committee to the Minister and the Department saying that we would like to be informed earlier rather than at this late stage that there was an issue with the qualification of accounts, which would have meant then we would have been able to ask some appropriate questions and drawn the necessary conclusions before that point. Are we agreed?
Is it possible?
Sorry, go ahead, Philip. Sorry, Matthew.
Is it possible? This is just a point of information. I don't know if the clerk knows. He may not. Whether in recent history the accounts have been qualified in previous years.
Oh, that's a good question. Don't know is the answer.
Some departments' accounts have been qualified. Most notably, what was then the Department of Economy's accounts were quite heftily qualified. There's been some other times I've sat in sort of committees. There's been other accounts that have been qualified, but I'm not aware of this Department of Finance. So if you're content, we'll append that to the letter and ask the question.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Would it not be normal course that the PAC committee then would take a look at that issue? Is that not what happens?
I would have thought that the PAC by a matter of they're supposed to look at all accounts that are qualified, aren't they?
Yeah, they'll be getting a.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I know you're in the PAC, Matthew. Sorry,
I'm not anymore actually, but I was, and I think what will happen is they will I think the CNAG will inform them and give them a briefing.
Yeah.
Okay. Time to move on. Good. Next item on the agenda, former head of the Civil Services appointment. Members will have noted commentary in the press in respect, thank you Matthew, to the appointment of the former interim head of the Civil Service and former Chief Executive of the Utility Regulator to the Board of Firmus Energy. As members will be aware, there was no cooling off period between the head of the Civil Service role and the Firmus Energy role. The reason was apparently that the former interim head of the Civil Service was not in fact a civil servant. We had, and even it was an interim head of the Civil Service, wasn't a civil servant. Matthew?
I think this is a really important subject that we need to find out some more information on. I'm not casting aspersions on this individual or indeed this appointment, but I think the bare facts are eyebrow raising. I think it's fair to say. This person's now gone from they were the utility regulator for Northern Ireland. They then spent nearly a year as interim head of the Civil Service and joined the board of Firmus. I understand there was a process, but obviously they had a year had passed since they had been utility regulator. But the thing that has emerged that is in a sense even more interesting than that appointment is the question of the fact that the head of the Civil Service wasn't a civil servant, which is obviously eyebrow raising and slightly anomalous. I think it does then raise a broader question about the robustness of our business appointments process, because it isn't clear that there are many questions about how, for example, the ACOBA process, the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments process, works in Westminster, Whitehall, but that at least has the advantage of the information being published on a website. So a senior civil servant who takes a business appointment has to apply to get guidance, and that guidance has to be published. We don't have any of that clarity here, and it was only for the journalist at the Irish News who seems to have uncovered this story or dug into it that we know. So I think it is worth us asking more questions about it.
Yep.
I distinctly remember us being told about Mrs. Piper's appointment. There was absolutely no mention.
She wasn't a civil servant.
Notification of any special situation, that she's been appointed the head of civil service, but she's not a civil servant. I think we probably would have spotted that had it been in the memo that we were sent. It raises all sorts of interesting arguments. Hopefully it'll not happen, but if there's any legal case taken against the decision that she made, what standing does it have if she wasn't actually a civil servant when she did it? Now, there's absolutely no doubt that being the former utility regulator, the role that she's now performing, being on the board of an energy company, is hardly a surprise. But that's too clever a ruse, as it were, to avoid the normal sort of gardening leave period. If you can say, well, I don't want to be a civil servant, I'm not a civil servant, and then when I go, I can do whatever I like without the normal controls. So I think it raises quite a few interesting technical points. Who decided that she wasn't a civil servant? Was it part of the deal that secured her for that interim post? And why did it only become public knowledge as a result of an investigative journalist? We would never have known this had that not happened.
Right.
The question I would have, if she wasn't a civil service, does that mean then that she wasn't subject to Cabinet Office investigation if there had been a complaint against the head of the civil service? And from that as well.
If she wasn't a civil servant, was she indeed subject to the Civil Service Code of Conduct?
Yeah.
I think, if I may, Chair, I think that is the question, because we were, as I understand it, the point is that as I understand it, that she was not subject to rules around cooling off based on her role as head of the civil service, because she was not a civil servant, ergo she was not subject to the same, which is obviously highly problematic, given that the reasons for those rules being in place in the first place are connected to, in relation to commercial appointments, information, submissions, commercially sensitive information that people have. I'm in no way, casting any aspersions, but I just think these are fairly obvious questions that we need to get more detail on as a committee.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing for me is to say I was surprised, and indeed I was sort of declaration of interest. I was contacted by the journalist and was quite surprised to hear that the fact she wasn't a civil servant. And if you look at sort of the wider aspects of it, I mean, it does raise some significant questions in that we are trying to get to the point of who's actually in charge of the civil service, who isn't supposed to be looking at the sort of conditions and terms of service, who is the professional head, who has accounting officer roles, all the things that you would expect to be able to say, right, you have the accountability and responsibility for the, the organisation. But if you're not a civil servant, and you're therefore not subject to the various rules and codes and conduct and the rest of it. And one of the other questions I have to have is I hope the new head of civil service is in fact a civil servant and isn't on secondment from her previous role, because that again raises some considerable questions that I think we as a committee, bearing in mind we're dealing with the RHI action plan, are questions we would like some answers to. So if we're content and so we can move on, can we write to that extent, write to the Minister and try and seek some clarifications from some of those answers? And indeed we have the new head of the civil service and coming before the committee, and I'm sure she'll have quite a few of the answers that we as a committee would like to put to her. Are we content? Thank you. Next, draft minute of proceeding. Draft minutes of the Finance Committee meeting of the 3rd of November, or page 7. Are we content that these are an accurate record of proceedings? Indeed. Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. There are no matters arising. Agreed. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, oral evidence, Defamation Bill, Committee Stage, Department of Finance. We will now receive... sorry, I need to remove all members from the spotlight. I think the only person on is Gemma.
Sorry, hold on a second. Sorry, what, Stephen? We just have... Yeah, okay, so that's wrong. It's the defamation bill, so we don't have the witnesses. Sorry, Chair, I think we're having some technical difficulties. The department is struggling, I think, to get connected, even though we trial. So if you just bear with us.
So have we got... Is Joanne here in person, or are they coming in on spotlight?
We've some. Sorry, so this one is, it's going to be Michael Foster and Martin Terrell from the department. Neither of them, so they were going to be on Starleaf, and they are not there.
Okay.
So,
and we don't know if we can bring forward Joanne.
But it's just Joanne on her own there so far. So, what we could do is, while we're sorting this out, move on to...
Okay, the next thing we have is obviously...
we
did, yeah.
Let's do that. And work this out.
That would mean is going into private session. Are you quite happy for this? Committee, are we happy to go into private session? Because the next thing is an update.
Agreed.
Okay.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland
Open session. The red light is on. Okay, team, we're on the item agenda number 9, Financial Reporting Departments and Public Bodies Bill, formal clause-by-clause scrutiny. On Starlife, we should have Jeff and Barry. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Chair.
Have we got Barry?
Jeff, is Barry going to join us shortly?
I will check. I think this has come across a little bit earlier than anticipated, so I'll send him a message now to make sure that he is, but I'm happy to continue, Chair.
Okay, Jeff. Okay, thanks very much indeed. So I've drawn members' attention to the following papers related to this agenda items. Peter's briefing note at page 182, Financial Reporting Bill table at page 186, Northern Ireland Fiscal Council response at page 199. Jeff, you've seen that response, have you?
Yes, Chair. I have seen the Fiscal Council's response, and I'm also aware of your clause-by-clause consideration, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Department comment on FE costs at page 205, Keeling schedule at page 207, Delegated powers memorandum at page 212, restricted delegated powers ASR advice on page 215, a copy of the Granny Act at page 219, a copy of the Financial Reporting Departments and Public Bodies Bill is introduced at page 243. Just remind members this has been quoted by Hansard. Remind members that we are now undertaking the formal clause-by-clause scrutiny of the bill. This is the final part of the committee stage and will inform a committee report on the bill. I advise members that the committee will proceed through the clauses and will put the questions to you formally, and inform members that where there are amendments, the question on the amendment will be put first, and the questions on then on the questions on the amended clause. Are we happy to continue? Okay. So we'll move down the bill table at page 186. Second one. Okay. Clause 1 amends the Government Resources and Accountings Act Northern Ireland 2001, the so-called Granny Act. This will allow the Department to issue directions to other departments on the preparation of estimates. It also allows the Department to designate certain bodies by making secondary legislation which will come to the Assembly under negative resolution procedure. The Department is required to consult with Treasury in respect of the designation of bodies. The estimates shall include information relating to the designated bodies, and the Northern Ireland Audit Office shall review all relevant financial transactions so as to ensure they are in accordance with any relevant authority. Members, are we content that we understand Clause 1? Okay. A number of possible amendments have been suggested to the clause. These are numbered 1.1 to 1.4 and are shown in the bill table. The Fiscal Council was asked for its commentary, and this is page 199. The Fiscal Council suggested that the committee seek a number of assurances from the Department specifically around 1. Setting out all expenditure under the sole authority of the Budget Act in a single table within the estimates. 2. Publishing its minute of accruing resources on its website alongside its other budget publications. 3. Improving transparency of the estimates by showing EU funding with a separate symbol. 4. Furnishing the Fiscal Council with the information on the use of sole authority and any headroom in the estimates before the publication of the estimates. And 5. Sharing with the Fiscal Council the new estimates memorandum when they are produced. So, Jeff, could you comment on the Fiscal Council's responses, and in particular on the assurances that were detailed in the correspondence?
Certainly, Chair. Just to say to the committee that we had a productive meeting with the Fiscal Council on transparency and areas where we could improve the transparency of those documents. I mean, I'll defer to Barry if he wants to provide anything more, but from my understanding of that meeting, we are happy for DOF to provide the assurances necessary on all aspects there, including the black box representation, publishing the minute alongside material within on our department website, and ensuring that we have appropriate symbols for EU funding within the estimate documentation. And on memorandum, I think we'll get to in a later clause, Chair, but we're more than happy to work with yourselves, departmental committees, or through Assembly Research, the Fiscal Council and departments on a memorandum that will be included with the estimate. So we're happy to provide those particular assurances. Now, we may have to talk a little bit around whether those the memorandum is included in legislation, but we're certainly more than content to accept those recommendations or confirm our commitment to the issues within the Fiscal Council paper. I'll leave it to Barry to say anything else.
All right, do you want to come in there?
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yes, as Jeff said, when the Fiscal Council were considering this, they met with us and we had a very useful session with them just to go to so we could get a clear understanding of what they needed as a user and a reader of the estimates document. So for the majority of those points which the Fiscal Council set out there, for example, a single table setting out all of the black box items which are being taken done on the sole authority of the Budget Act, for example, and the issue of any headroom that's being built into the estimates. That's something, as you know, we already would provide to the committee by way of a briefing paper, but the Fiscal Council quite rightly said that any user of the estimate would have a perfectly legitimate expectation of seeing that set out. So that's something that we can incorporate into the estimate document itself, so that you've going forward, and we can undertake to do. Likewise, the use of a symbol just to clearly identify any European Union receipts is something which again can be done. Some European receipts line, as you may recall from looking at the estimates document now, some are very clearly labelled as European Union receipts, for example, the Interreg and peace programmes, but there are some others that, for example, the Common Agricultural Policy and so on, which quite rightly, if a user wasn't familiar with those, wouldn't automatically know that they were European Union receipts. So we're happy to include that in the estimates document.
Okay, team. Any comments?
Chair, could I ask one question?
Jim.
Barry, can you confirm that you still plan to list the types of accruing resources in Part 1 of the estimates?
Yes, there will be an ambit, an expenditure ambit and a receipt ambit set out in the Part 1 of the estimate going forward. So yes, there will be.
And that will identify the types of accruing resources?
Yes, that's correct.
So then when the minute comes along after the bill receives royal assent, it's going to contain the same information, yes?
That's correct, yes. Which is essentially the same format at the minute. So the accruing resource minute follows the estimate. So after the Assembly has passed the estimate and the budget bill, and that has received royal assent, then the department, as you know, then lays the minute. So that basically enacts that decision which the Assembly has taken by passing the bill.
Any others?
Okay.
Okay. So if members are there for... Sorry,
I had a question when I was on accruing resources, but maybe this isn't the precise point to raise it, but the question was, the changes that are going to be made around accruing resources, the limit on them will no longer be set in the Budget Act, is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. So what will be voted in the Budget Act will now be the net total, rather
That's
than
a substantial reduction in control by the Assembly, is it not?
Well, the Assembly will still be voting to pass the estimates, and in the Budget Act it will still show the overall net expenditure.
But the Budget Act will no longer have the limit on the accruing resources. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that limit is an element of control by the Assembly, is it not, in the passing of the legislation?
Yes, and that is one of the reasons behind that is because that has resulted in a significant number of excess votes over a number of years, where whenever a limit was set on accruing resources, where there were services being funded by those receipts, if the level of services that needed to be applied or delivered was any higher, even though receipts were being received to fund those, because the department would have reached the limit of its accruing resources, it then entailed an excess vote, because the additional receipts had to be ciphered instead.
But just to
so this was one of the purposes of the review financial process, was to prevent those unnecessary excess votes where it had come about because if a level of service had to be provided which should have been funded by receipts, but those receipts couldn't be retained as accruing resources.
But to take a practical and topical example, the plastic bag levy is an accruing resource, yes?
That's correct, yes.
So there will no longer be a limit set on that in the Budget Act?
That's
right?
correct.
So does that mean that that levy can be increased without recourse to the Assembly and legislation? Yeah?
It doesn't mean that the levy can be increased, because the levy itself is set in legislation, although now that's it's not a Department of Finance legislation. What it would mean is that if, for example, more plastic bags were used by customers than the department had forecast, rather than that receipt being handed over to the as a consolidated fund extra receipt, it would allow the department to use those receipts to fund the sort of environmental programs that the levy is set up to deliver and fund.
But is there any element of loss of control by the Assembly over that?
I don't believe it's a loss of control. The Assembly has full sight of what the receipt figures are. They would be set out in the estimate and the receipts ambit, as explained in part 1 of the estimate. So the Assembly will have full sight of what those receipts are, what they're being used to fund. What it does do is what it does do is prevent a sort of cliff edge, where if a service that is being funded predominantly by receipts, if the demand for that service increases at all and the receipts to fund it increase, that the department will be able to retain those receipts to fund the service that it is delivering with them. Because there have been cliff edges before where that sort of situation has arisen. It has meant the department has had to cipher any additional receipts, and then has ended up resulted in an excess vote, which I would argue is probably unnecessary.
But Barry, surely the reason for that would be that the budgeting process in the first place had gone wrong, and if we reached the point where they'd exceeded their vote, Surely that's indicative of that was the wrong budgeting process coming up. So increasing the levels of accrual, does that not just give a bit of an open checkbook?
Well, not where I would argue that it's not where you have a situation where particularly there's a demand-led service, which is funded either in whole or in part through receipts from those receiving the service. What it does is it allows the departments or the ALBs concerned to continue to deliver the service that the service users require, and fund that from the income which they receive from those who are paying for it.
Chair, I might add there as well that for most of these cases, there is other legislation which governs the way in which services are to be funded from receipts. So there'll be principles in place to set the level so that it's only cost recovery, so on and so forth. So there are other safeguards in the system, in the initial legislation that governs the specific policy that might be covered by the overall receipts base.
But Jeff, is that right when it comes to the plastic bag levy? Like the Minister's talking about increasing that fivefold, which is obviously unrelated to the actual cost of the administration of it.
Yeah. In the case of the carrier bag levy, that levy, the level at which that's set, whether it's 10 pence, 20 pence or 25 pence, that is all set in legislation itself separately. That's not dictated by the Budget Act. What is dictated is that as part of the agreement from with the Chief Secretary of the Treasury that in Northern Ireland that we can retain receipts from the carrier bag levy as it is to be used to fund environmental programmes.
I suppose the point I'm really getting at, Barry, is that if you have an excessive plastic bag tax, to take that example, and you get to spend all that on green projects, you could be awash with money for that at the very same time as money for health and education is in desperate need. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Chair, it's slightly different because obviously we have only permission to retain those plastic bag receipts for environmental projects. That's an explicit stipulation from the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. So, you could increase the plastic bag levy, but you couldn't then transfer that in any way to health or education.
Yeah, that's the point I was making. Okay, I'll probably take you out of your course, Chair. Sorry.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Matthew.
I had a brief question. Just on the assurances that you've both helpfully given in relation to the 4 recommendations of the Fiscal Council, what form do those? So you're now giving them to I guess them and us, them through us verbally. Will they be written down somewhere? Will they?
Unanswered.
It's unanswered, yeah. But
in the committee's report.
That's in the committee's report.
But I get that. But what I mean is that in terms of how the practice is going to work for officials, and how will it be regularised and made standard practice? You see what I mean? Will it be?
Well, it will be included in the guidance and the templates which we provide to the departments in completing their estimates. So you will actually see, for example, the table setting out, while the black boxes items are already recorded at the end of each individual department's estimate. As part of the introduction to the estimates, we will include a table which compiles all that into one place. Likewise, the issue there of headroom, which at the minute we would provide the committee with a table of that in the briefing paper whenever we're presenting the estimates, but we will actually include a table like that actually in the introduction of the estimates as well. So it'll essentially, you will see it when the first of the new style estimate documents, which will appear, you will see this in the introductory sections to the estimates.
Okay, thank you. Just another quick one, Jeff and Sarah Barry. Obviously, having been in discussion with the Fiscal Council on the issues we've raised in this one, is this a change in the memo of understanding between yourselves and the Fiscal Council?
No, we wouldn't see it as such, Chair. We would just see it as undertaking the business that we are there to do in terms of providing them with information as and when requested and engaging with them on the financial process. So we wouldn't see it as a change in the memorandum of understanding at all. We would just see it as part and parcel of the work that we're now routinely doing with them.
Okay, thanks. And Sarah, I'd just like to reassure the committee when I'm sort of bringing this into the floor, I'll be talking to the Minister and asking for his assurances as well to make sure we've got that, so if anybody's in any doubt. Are we happy to move to the formal stage of this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Are members therefore content to formally set aside amendments 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 and 1.4, which deal with these issues? We will return to 1.3 alpha presently. Are we agreed? Agreed. Okay. I now refer members to Amendment 1.3 alpha. The committee instructed the Bill Office to draft an amendment which would provide for greater transparency to committees while not burdening the estimates with inflexibility and extraneous detail. This amendment captures the benefits of adding an estimates memorandum for each department. Annual subordinate legislation would require the Department of Finance to agree the format of the estimates memorandum with the Finance Committee. Other statutory committees could feed in their requirements in respect of their department's estimate memorandum. Statutory committees might even choose to take note debates on their own department's estimates memorandum. Somebody's seeking. Sorry, apologies for that. We just had some slight disturbance outside the door.
I was interested in presumably this is about the financial reporting bill.
Yeah, that's it. The excitement of
Accruing
it.
resources.
Yeah. Sorry, Jeff, you wanted to make some comments about 1.3a?
Sorry, Chair, could you repeat that?
You wanted to make some comments on Amendment 1.3a?
Yes, Chair. I mean, from the Department's point of view, anything that supports Assembly committees in their scrutiny is to be welcomed, and we believe that a memorandum is a good idea. The Department shares the view of the Fiscal Council in that non-legislative solutions can be more agile and responsive to the needs of individual committees. Committees currently have the power to request and gather information from departments, as you know, Chair, and DOF would be happy to work with the committee and Assembly Research and the Fiscal Council on templates that would provide a relevant level of detail. These could be commissioned by DOF alongside our estimates, our general estimates commissioning process. In that context, however, though, we don't feel we can support the Amendment 1.3a. There's a few reasons for that. First of all, the granularity requested is a little bit too restrictive. For some departments, that level of detail is too high, and for some departments, we feel that level of detail is too low. I'll give you a sort of concrete example, Chair, of one maybe estimate that you have a look at, and that's the DOF Pensions Estimate. And a DOF Pensions Memorandum under 1.3a would have approximately 700 lines of detail on pension payments and approximately 200 lines of detail on pension income, and we feel that that's that kind of one-size-fits-all approach is difficult to put into legislation, and it maybe restricts what you're aiming to do. In terms of that yearly regulations, it may not actually be responsive enough either, Chair, as memorandum for supplementary estimates might require a slightly different approach depending on what has happened throughout the year. So if you have a memorandum set in legislation for main estimates, you may want to slightly tweak it or slightly change it as you come to the end of the financial year, depending on what has happened that particular financial year. And finally then, obviously, legislation and regulations don't allow for a tailored department by department approach. And for all of those reasons, why we absolutely support the principle of a memorandum, and we're more than happy to work with the committee on a practical, non-legislative solution, we cannot. We feel we cannot support the legislative solution or the restrictions that would come from that particular legislative solution in primary legislation, Chair. I don't know whether Barry wants to add anything more to that.
To be honest, probably nothing more to add there, Jeff. I think you'd sort of covered all the points that I would have been seeking to make there. Just to emphasise again, very happy to consider the idea of an estimates memorandum, and to, if it's helpful, we can include that in the guidance that we give to departments, and provide a template to them, which again we're happy to have agreed in advance with this committee. Or if it's more suitable, to allow individual departments to agree templates with their individual committees, whichever would be happier with, would be more useful for the Assembly as a whole.
Okay, thoughts?
I think we've been given a pretty plausible explanation why this amendment won't work and is probably unnecessary. So I would take on board the advice we've shared.
Keith?
Yeah, Chair, I don't think we need to make the process any more difficult or harder to understand. I'm talking personally, I don't know about others saying, so we want information, and we want it broke down. I suppose I have to refer to the clerk on the bill and an explanatory document, make life easier and understandable. So I'm taking on board what I've just heard, to be fair.
Okay. Matthew?
Well, I mean, I think with respect to the officials in question, the civil servants who present a bill will always want to keep the bill as simple as possible, and that's they're doing their jobs in wanting that, because that's not if the department had wanted this stuff to be in the bill, they would have put it in the bill. So that's not necessarily the question in front of us, and that's in no way to cast aspersions on Barry or Jeff for the very robust evidence they've given. But I suppose the question is, what's our view of how robust the alternative, if we want greater clarity, the alternative recommendations or the alternative approach basically suggested by the Fiscal Council. I think given we have had a relatively high degree of assurance from the department, and we're going to have it in both in Hansard, obviously in a kind of in terms of written assurance, and it would be, I think, helpful for us to seek it in written assurance from the Minister or the Department. I'm not going to die in a ditch over our specific amendments, as long as we get clarity that we are going to have some of the issues that we want addressed. And I think the fact that the Fiscal Council have given their view on it is helpful.
Okay. James?
Yeah, I think I don't feel inclined to hand it to you about it either. So.
Okay. Hello, Jim.
Okay.
Gemma. Not Gemma.
That's not Gemma. Stephen. There we go.
Gemma, your thoughts?
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm content with whatever is agreed. I don't think we need to make it any more complicated than what it already is.
Okay. I think that's...
So the committee is seeking a written assurance then from the Minister?
Yeah, we'll seek a written assurance from the Minister. And again, it's something I'll bring up in the remarks from the floor.
Okay.
Okay. So therefore, are we therefore content? No, we're not. We'll move on to that next one. I would also refer members to Amendment 1.5 on page 192 of the meeting packs. This is the Fiscal Council amendment, which required the Department to share information with that body and would give that body certain powers. The committee previously indicated informally that it wouldn't pursue this amendment. Jeff, you want to say something about 1.5?
I mean, only in passing, Chair, in terms of there is legislation due to come up before you at some stage on the establishment of the Fiscal Council, and we're concerned that any amendment here might not quite compromise that legislation, but certainly restrict the ability of that legislation to accurately present the Fiscal Council in a way that you want it to, Chair. So that's the reason that we wouldn't be supportive of that particular amendment.
My only concern is that we've heard for some time that the legislation is being prepared for the Fiscal Council. Do we know if it's actually gone to the drafters yet?
I'm not aware of it, Chair, but again, it's not my side of things. It would be perverse if I was creating the legislation for the independent body that was marking my homework. So I suspect we can find that out for you, though, Chair.
Yeah, well, we'll write to the Minister as well, because obviously one of the reasons we're doing for this is because we're expecting there to be legislation for an independent fiscal council coming down the track. But as far as we're aware, it's not in the process of being drafted yet. Okay. Okay, team, in respect to Amendment 1.5, are members therefore content to formally set aside Amendment 1.5? Are we agreed? Agreed. I refer members to Amendment 1.6 at page 193 of meeting packs. The Department has indicated this is necessary in order to include NIPSO within the provisions of the bill. The Department has provided assurances that NIPSO has no objection and the change will not adversely impact on that organisation's independence. Any comments?
I take it that doesn't impact at all on the Audit Committee's role with the NIPSO.
Jeff, did you hear that?
Yeah, there is no impact on the Audit Committee's role in NIPSO. This is just how we present the estimates and how we are able to ask NIPSO for their information for the estimate.
Okay. Right, therefore, members, are we content to formally amend Clause 1 of the Bill in line with Amendment 1.6 as it is drafted? Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Do any members have any other comments in respect of Clause 1? If members are content, therefore I think we are we content with Clause 1 of the Bill as amended? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. All agreed. Clause 2 amends the Granny Act to change the name of the department from DFP to Department of Finance. Confirm we all understand Clause 2?
I just have a question. Surely that must have happened at the time of the transfer of functions orders. How is that only happening now?
It's a bit like the fact that we left out the reservoirs legislation between departments. Yeah. Just slipped through.
Well, what do the officials say about that?
My understanding, Chair, of that is that the legislation at the time allowed all of the existing legislation to be read where Department of Finance and personnel could be then used as Department of Finance. However, this was just an opportunity for us to clarify that in Granny that when it's talking about the department, it refers to the Department of Finance. So it's just an opportunity for us to be able to clarify.
Okay. Okay. Right, members, do we understand Clause 2? Okay. As no amendment has been proposed, are members content with Clause 2 as drafted? Are we agreed? Agreed. Clause 3 sets the commencement date as the day after royal assent. Confirm, members, that we understand Clause 3.
Agreed.
As no amendment has been proposed, are members content with Clause 3 as drafted? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. A number of other queries have been made or amendments have been suggested. These are numbers 5.1 to 5.7 from page 196 of the meeting packs. These include the clarification of the status of the Office of the Attorney-General from Northern Ireland, the treatment of Northern Ireland Water, NILGOSC and the Northern Ireland Assembly Commission, the treatment of North-South bodies, the designation of bodies to more than one consolidated fund, and additional costs for further education colleges, and the Department's responses, page 205. Jeff, your view on the further education colleges and their extra set of accounts you're going to have to do every year at 30 grand each, you don't think that's a significant material cost?
I mean, in the context of their budget, it isn't. It isn't regarded as a material cost. However, it's one of those things where we have provided information on possibly the worst case scenario, Chair. We're hopeful that those costs are actually lower than what we have provided as a maximum outlay. But it is one area where slightly unintended consequence in terms of additional information being sought and additional audit required just on the difference of the financial year ends for those areas. And we've had a look at this. We've double checked again, Chair, with the Department of Education in case that this might impact on schools, and they're awaiting a confirmation from Audit Office on a solution on schools that will avoid those sort of costs as well for them. But yes, Chair, we're hopeful that the actual costs for FE colleges on getting that additional information is lower than what we have outlaid.
Jeff, we're talking about FE colleges, schools as well?
Well, we double-checked with schools, Chair, simply because they have the same financial year-end date, but they don't have, there won't be any costs associated with schools.
Okay. Any comments?
But whatever the level of cost there will be for FE colleges, because of the duplication, yes?
Yes, that's correct. There will be some level of cost involved there, yes.
Okay.
And is it essential to require them to duplicate?
The issue with audit is they're saying that anything over, I think it's 3 months difference between financial year ends requires some level of assurance on no changes in materiality. So I think it is essential and it is required. It's just how much it might cost to do that.
Okay. Okay, members, have any other outstanding queries or concerns for the officials in this regard? No. Okay. If members are content, members therefore content to formally set aside any amendments relating to 5.1 to 5.7. Are we agreed? Are we agreed?
Yep.
Agreed. Okay. Clause 4 sets out the short title as being the Financial Reporting Departments and Public Bodies Act Northern Ireland 2021. Members, are we content to understand Clause 4? Agreed. So no amendments are proposed. Are members content of the short title as drafted? Are we agreed? Agreed. Next item, the long title is given as a bill to amend the law relating to the preparation of estimates and accounts of departments and certain non-departmental public bodies and for connected purposes. Are members content with the long title as drafted? Is this agreed? Agreed. This concludes the committee stage for the Financial Reporting Departments and Public Bodies Bill. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Barry. Cheers. Talk to you again soon. Thank you very much indeed. I'll ask the officials to come off the spotlight. And we've got Gemma back on.
Yeah,
she is. Excellent. Okay. Therefore, on the committee, are we content for the clerk to return with a report on the committee stage for the Financial Reporting Departments and Public Bodies Bill for the committee's approval? Are we agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Shall we move on to item number 10, and then we'll bring back the officials in for the...
Are we? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to item number 10, written briefing subordinate legislation. Members' attention is drawn to the Clerk's Note on page 261 and the SL1 for the General Register's Office Fees Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2002 at page 262. The purpose of this statutory rule is to introduce a nil fee for a conversion declaration by a same-sex couple to convert a civil partnership to a marriage and by an opposite-sex couple to convert their marriage to a civil partnership. The rule is subject to negative resolutions, and it's proposed the rule will come into operations on the 7th of December 2021. Any amendments, any comments?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I mean, it's obviously going to go through. Maybe I'm calling me old-fashioned, but I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. That these regulations and other legislation diminish and dilute the principle of marriage, the traditional marriage. I know one is speaking against the tide, but I do not want to be notified to be indicated that I support what's been suggested.
Okay.
Likewise, I wish to dissent from this.
I would say, Chair, just for the purposes of stating on the record, the previous speakers are entitled to state their views, but I think I would want to state for the benefit of the not just LGBTQ people here, but the large, I think, majority of people here now who are relieved that we in Northern Ireland is finally inching forward in terms of rights for same-sex couples, and indeed for non-same-sex sort of, heterosexual couples who want to turn a marriage into a civil partnership, because they can now do that at no cost.
Could I just correct the honourable member for Belfast South? The people of Northern Ireland were never consulted about this. This was brought in at Westminster, and this assembly was suspended for 3 years. We've never had an opportunity to actually make our views known on this. It was imposed upon us, and now we're left with a fait accompli, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks. Philip?
Not to prolong the debate, I think Mr Wells described himself, and I hope I don't quote him wrong, as old-fashioned.
Hello, could you speak up a bit? Sorry.
I think Mr Wells described himself as old-fashioned. I would concur with Matthew. I think this is a good step. I would say it's certainly not old-fashioned. It's completely out-of-date views that were never correct in the first instance, and I'm delighted to see this and that we are moving forward. I think there is no doubt, given the number of discussions in the Assembly, that this is supported by the overwhelming majority of people in the North.
And just as two members have stated that they wish to object to this, I think that it should be the rest of the members here. I want to be written down as long as Matthew is saying that I'm completely supportive of it and welcome it. So do we need a vote on that, Chair? Well, are there anyone else against it?
Chair, my screen is wet. I can't get moving the pages for some reason. Have we any indication of costs or what the costs incurred? I'm not taking away from the issue, but purely talking about costs. Do we know what they are?
It's a nil fee.
It says nil fee.
It says there are no significant financial impacts on businesses, the voluntary sector, or charities. That's what it tells us.
Probably not.
Could I just add that I said some people could call me old-fashioned. I didn't say that I was old-fashioned. I'm traditional in believing that marriage is between one man and one woman, and that's the basis of civilised society and the basis of bringing up children and nurturing them. And I will always oppose anything that dilutes or diminishes that.
I think, in view of the views of the committee and sort of other views expressed, I think we will go to a recorded vote so that people could do that as they do so. Do I need a seconder?
No.
Okay. So we'll go to recorded votes. All those in favour of the supported legislation, say aye.
Aye. Show of hands. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Thank you.
And those against?
1, 2.
1, 2. And any abstentions? One abstention.
One abstention.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion carried.
Motion carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda are members asked to note the relevant part of the 5th report of the Examiner Statutory Rules at page 274. The ESR advises of a drafting error in Statutory Rule 21252, Financial Assistance Aluminium Composite Material ACM Remediation Fund, Private Residential Properties over 18 metre Regulations Northern Ireland 2021. The Department has confirmed that it will make the amendments needed at the earliest opportunity. Any member care to comment or note? So noted. It's agreed. Excellent. And if we can move back then through our agenda items and move back to October monitoring, and that will be on, Defamation Bill?
Well, just we have Joanne there.
Do we have Joanne? Right, okay, we'll do for October monitoring. Apologies, team. We're going to October monitoring. That's item number 7 on your agenda. The committee will now receive oral evidence from the departmental officials on the October monitoring round. Can I welcome Joanne, Jeff again, and Anne? Hi, Anne.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much indeed. Team, the relevant papers are the Clerk's briefing paper is page 114. A copy of the Minister's oral statement on the October monitoring round is page 122. The Department's monthly forecast outturn for August is at page 150. The written ministerial statement on budget 22-25 funding available is page 171. A response from the Department for the Economy in relation to unique circumstances funding bids is at page 176. And at page 41 of the tabled items is the response from the Minister in respect of cost pressures associated with Northern Ireland water and electricity usage Just to remind everybody, this session has been reported by Hansard. Joanna, Jeff, who's doing the speaking for this one?
Chair, Jeff's going to start.
Right. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to brief the committee on the outcome of the Executive's 21-22 October monitoring exercise. As usual, Chair, feel free to stop me and ask questions at any time.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Keep on.
Following conclusion of the June monitoring exercise, there have been a number of changes which have resulted in additional funding being available for allocation. The majority of additional funding was a result of the UK Government's 6th of September announcement of an extra funding provided for the NHS in England to help tackle the COVID backlog and face the upcoming winter pressures. This was made available in October monitoring. Her Majesty's Treasury had not confirmed the precise level of resulting additional Barnett consequentials for this announcement. However, in order to ensure our health service has access to the funding as quickly as possible, 160 million resource DEL and 20 million capital DEL was included in October monitoring. The variance between the actual funding that we will receive and that was made available in October monitoring will be addressed in January monitoring. Changes to a number of central items, including regional rates forecasts, reclassification of financial transactions capital repayments and EU match funding, resulted in an additional 20.8 million resource DEL and 6.5 million financial transactions capital DEL. 12.6 million financial transactions capital was also received from the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department in England in respect of repayments of launch investment funding provided for the Bombardier C series. Departments declared reduced requirements of 41 million resource DEL, 19.6 million capital DEL and 1.1 million financial transactions capital. Approval was provided to the Department of Education for the reclassification of 1.8 million resource DEL to capital DEL, primarily for youth service IT equipment. The result of these changes is that 223.6 million resource DEL, 31 million capital DEL and 66.7 million financial transactions capital was available for allocation. Before turning to departmental allocations, I would like to highlight a number of specific areas. Firstly, Northern Ireland Protocol. The Department for Justice bid for 3.4 million for implementation of the protocol, and the Department for Health bid for 0.3 million. As there are negotiations ongoing with Her Majesty's Treasury to secure further funding, neither bid was met in October monitoring. Turning to city deals, there is a requirement to use construction and procurement delivery as part of the quality assurance process for city deal projects. 0.2 million has been held centrally for this purpose. DFE bid for 0.15 million for this funding in October monitoring, and this request was met from the earmarked centrally held funding. A further 5.8 million capital DEL continues to be held centrally for expected city deals expenditure in 21-22, and this position continues to be kept under review. New Decade, New Approach. In June monitoring, DFE was allocated 2.8 million capital DEL and 0.26 million resource DEL for the Graduate Entry Medical School. DFE has now submitted a bid for a further 0.1 million for this project. It is anticipated that funding for this will be provided from the NDNA financial package, and therefore this bid was not considered in October monitoring. Turning to departmental allocations, the resource DEL bids submitted by departments amounted to 516 million, more than double the 223 million available. Full details of bids and allocations are set out in the tables which accompany the monitoring statements. However, I would like to highlight a few specific areas. As the Executive's top priority, 200 million or 89.4% of the available resource DEL funding was allocated to the Department for Health. This provides 80 million for COVID-19 hospital service pressures, 70 million for the pay award requested by the Health Minister, 30 million to aid with pressures in elective care, 15 million for health and social care trusts, and 5 million to expand the mental health support fund. The Department of Education receives 9.2 million, 6.8 million to support special educational needs, 1.7 million to assist with general school-based pressures, and 0.7 million for substitute teacher cover.
Jeff,
6 million.
Jeff, just a quick one. I mean, there's significant pressures for the Department of Education, but I remember the Minister saying that he was going to address those in the next monitoring round. Are we beginning to get an indication that those pressures will be met from the next monitoring round?
It will very much depend, Chair, on the level of resources that are surrendered by departments as part of the next monitoring round. It will not know that until probably the end of December, start of January at this stage, Chair.
Yeah, but it's quite substantial. They're looking for about 32 million, aren't they?
My understanding is that it is around that quantum, yes, Chair.
Okay. Here, cheers. Keep going, Jim. Sorry.
£6 million was provided to the Department for Infrastructure. This included £4 million for roads, routine maintenance and winter pressures, £1.5 million for Northern Ireland Water to aid with increased energy costs, and £0.5 million for support to taxi services. £3.2 million has been allocated to the Executive Office for lost FTC loan interest repayment income due to the revision of loan terms and holiday payment arrangements, which impact on the timing of the interest repayment. £3 million has been allocated to the Department of Finance to conclude the COVID-19 local restriction support schemes. £2 million has been allocated to the Department of Justice, of which £1.5 million is for Legal Services Agency and £0.5 million for Safer Communities Programme. £0.2 million has been allocated to the Assembly to cover members' costs, including allowances and pensions. Turning to Capital Dale, all bids for Capital Dale submitted by departments were met. This totaled £27.8 million. £8.6 million to the Department for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs for COVID-19 recovery of Small Settlements Regeneration Programme and Rural Community Schemes. The Department of Education received £11.5 million, of which £8.2 million was for minor works, £1.3 million for IT equipment and £2 million for CO2 monitors. The Department of Health received £6.7 million of additional Capital Dale, £3.1 million for COVID-19 health support services and £3.6 million for health and social care trusts. £1 million was provided to the Executive Office for Social Investment Fund. £3.2 million conventional capital remains unallocated at the conclusion of the October monitoring exercise. And as it was an area of interest before, I want to mention to the committee that specific reference was made within the October monitoring commissioning letter that was sent to departments to allow them to reflect any impact on capital spend as a result of the construction material prices increases and the published procurement advisory note. As again, all capital bids were met in October monitoring, the level of borrowing required continues to be kept under review. Turning to financial transactions capital, no bids were submitted by departments in October monitoring. Departments are on track to spend £68.1 million, however, £66.7 million of FT.
No bids were received?
No bids were received, Chair, no. £66.7 million FT capital remains unallocated. Ministers have again been asked to actively seek opportunities within their departments to come forward with proposals to spend this funding. Looking to ring-fenced resource Dale, at the conclusion of October monitoring, there is no surplus funding in ring-fenced resource Dale for depreciation and impairments, and there are unmet pressures of £21.9 million. Historically, underspends materialised during the latter part of the financial year, and as such, we expect the situation to resolve itself in January. There remains £443.8 million unallocated in relation to student loan impairments. This funding may only be used for this specific purpose. It is therefore not available for allocation by the Executive.
Jeff, have we done any analysis of that? Are we likely? Is that a quantum that we recognise, or is that just because that is the Northern Ireland proportionate via the sort of Barnett formula?
You're right, Chair. In the latter, it's really just a running through of the Barnett formula on the English costs, and obviously their repayment is less and their loans are higher. So that's why we have a huge amount that we wouldn't necessarily think should be allocated here or will be allocated here during the year.
Okay. All right. Cheers. Thanks. Keep on.
Yeah, full details of all the transactions are set out in the tables that accompanied the October monitoring statements, and these tables include detailed spending area changes, and we're happy to take further questions, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. And Jeff, thanks very much indeed for your usual sort of comprehensive brief as we go through. In respect to resource Dale, departmental bids are quite high at over £550 million. I know some of these include inescapable costs associated with education, COVID measures, etc., etc. But are we heading for difficulties in terms of resource budget towards the end of the financial year? Are we heading for a crunch?
Chair, I think departments will always bid for anything that they think they may be able to spend, and once the outcome of October monitoring is known, then departments will be able to adjust their budgets and plans accordingly. So I wouldn't be overly concerned. John may correct me on this one, but I wouldn't be overly concerned that we are heading for a crunch. I think it's just we have another opportunity in January to reallocate resources where resources are available, and I believe that departments will be making plans to ensure that they live within their budgets.
Yeah. And I don't expect it, but I'll ask the question anyhow. Are we expecting any more Barnett money coming through?
We're expecting around £14 million from the, it was a home support fund in England. We haven't got precise, or we hadn't got precise details of that in October monitoring, and hence why it wasn't included in October monitoring, but that's coming through, and we're expecting that before the end of the financial year. We're engaged in a process at the minute, Chair, to finalise the funding coming from England through the supplementary process there, and once that process is finalised, we'll have a better understanding of what's available for January monitoring. Okay,
and just a final question. I mean, the Minister previously stated that the Secretary of State hadn't signed off on all the monies that were coming through in various allocations. Has that now happened?
The Secretary of State has provided a letter confirming the amounts that were in the spending review and a number of other additional financial packages. So that letter is now has been received, and the Minister has laid a corresponding note into the Assembly.
Is it in that note, or is that referring to in year, or is that going to refer to the full 3 years as a sort of as the Minister wrote and said this is what we're expecting over the next 3 years?
So that's the next 3 years, Chair. There's no requirement for the Secretary of State to write in year to us to confirm funding.
So that's it. So that's the next 3 years funding confirmed on the basis of what the Secretary of State has written. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jeff. Just on the bulk of the money that was allocated, as you said, came from a Barnett consequential, or the Department's estimate of what a Barnett consequential would be based on an announcement made on spending under the NHS in England on the 6th of September. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
And so, just remind me what that was in terms of Ardell.
So our estimate of it was 160 million resource and 20 million capital, Dale. Since then, we have actually got confirmation of the numbers. It was too late for October monitoring, but we are able to say that there will be an additional 0.772 million resource, Dale, coming forward in January monitoring on that, and there'll actually be a reduction of 3.659 in capital. We overestimated on the capital side of things by 3.7 million.
So basically there's an additional £700,000 on resource and 3 million less capital. Okay.
Yes.
In relation to sort of some of the decisions that were made, it's not uncommon for a finance minister to make an overcommitment in October monitoring that can be corrected or changed in subsequent allocations, i.e. in January.
If I can jump in on that one, Jeff, while overcommitments are not necessarily uncommon at this stage of the year, it would be very difficult to have an overcommitment, especially when you're looking at the levels of pressures put forward by other departments. Obviously, we have to make sure by the time we get to the end of the year that we balance the books. We've one more monitoring round to go. We've no expectations of receiving additional Barnett, so we will largely be relying on departments either surrendering money or consuming their own pressures. So given that, it wouldn't have been realistic to envisage an overcommitment at this point in the year.
Is there any flexibility at all, now that you know what the position is going to be for 22, 23, and obviously and some subsequent years, and you know that's in Ardell terms that's going to mean there is going to, like, I know there's a debate between DOF and the Treasury about what that means and where the baseline is, but there will be more in Ardell terms. Does the budget exchange scheme allow for any flexibility in terms of doing in-year spend now that can come off? There's nothing in the budget exchange scheme?
No, but budget exchange allows us to carry unspent monies forward up to a certain limit. It doesn't allow you to bring spending forward.
There's no way in which the finance minister could none whatsoever.
None whatsoever. Okay. None whatsoever. He could go to Treasury, but we know what the answer would be on that one.
Okay, and then in relation to the other Barnett consequences that have been announced for the next monitoring round, Jeff, you mentioned 14 million from a home support scheme. Is that an estimate, or is that an actual? Has that been confirmed by the Treasury?
That's my estimate. I think the number has been confirmed. It's 14 point something, but it's only been confirmed recently, and I don't have the precise number here.
Okay. In relation to what the health department, the money that's been allocated to the health department, will that is the expectation that is that all relating to current in-year pressures, or are there longer term? Obviously, it's not. I'm talking about the resource rather than the capital, but is that all to deal with in-year pressures?
Well, it is all in-year pressures. Obviously, the pay award pressure will give rise to a longer term commitment going forward, but it's all in-year pressure at this point. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Matthew. Philip?
Yep, thank you. And thanks for the briefing. Just following on from the point Matthew talked about there in terms of overcommitment, because I know he's raised them publicly in other forums as well. So he has said that the Finance Minister has the power, particularly with regard to the disgraceful universal credit cut at Westminster, but that Matthew said that the Finance Minister had the power to fund universal uplift through an overcommitment which can be covered from next year's budget. So, first of all, does the Finance Minister have that power to make allocations, as Matthew has claimed, or does it require executive agreement?
Right. You're absolutely correct. The Finance Minister does not himself have the power to either make allocations or have an overcommitment. That has to be agreed by the executive. And in terms of the overcommitment, we do have to balance the books by the end of the year, so we have to make sure whatever we build in is reasonable. And when you're looking at the level of pressures that departments are putting forward, an overcommitment wouldn't have been reasonable at this stage of the year.
So just for clarity, the answer to both questions is no, the Finance Minister doesn't have the power and you can't have the overcommitment from next year.
Yes, that's right. The answer to both those questions is no.
Thank you. Just then, in terms of moving on to other subjects, the 12.3 million of Community Renewal Fund, or the Shared Prosperity Fund, or the New Deal Fund, or the New Circumstances, I mean, have officials any sight or visibility of that fund yet?
No, we don't have any sight or visibility on those funds. That's a fund that's administered by UK government centrally, and it's not directed through the executive.
But you don't have any visibility of it, but do you think that it's going to be funding which will coincide with current executive priorities?
I'm not aware. I don't think that the current executive priorities are something that they consider whenever they consider bids for that particular funding. So I suspect not, but I'm not being able to talk from a position of knowledge in that one.
Yeah, if I can jump in just to come in behind what Jeff was saying there, it's not an area, but our understanding is that in some cases the UK government may come to the executive and ask for views at a very late stage in the bidding process, but that doesn't really allow the executive's priorities to be taken into account, and it's very much managed by the UK government without the executive's involvement, despite the funding being into devolved areas.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Sir, Pat, just a very
mine's just small, and it was just to deal with what Philip had been asking there about the Finance Minister on the on that uplift, or what we're talking about really is around those universal credits. Well, before those powers were handed back by the two larger parties, did we have the power then in order to address that problem that arises now?
I don't think the question so much is about the power to make changes to to provide additional funding for welfare, because we do that through the welfare mitigations that are already in place. I think the question this time is about the affordability of that, and the executive, quite simply, looking at the figures in the October monitoring round, there wasn't enough money to fund everything that we may have wanted to fund, and there was not the opportunity to have an overcommitment.
I'm talking about before those powers were handed back to the British government.
The executive still has the powers over the welfare, although we would need DWP to agree to us doing it, otherwise we would be disproportionately affected. So the issue is not about the power all over the benefit system, but about the affordability of that. And if we do anything which breaks parity with GB, that comes out of the executive's DEL budget. And the simple fact was, at this point, it's not affordable unless we reduce other departments' budgets.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Jim?
2 quick points. Some time ago in the House, I asked the Minister for an update on the figures relating to the Barnett consequentials granted to health and those that were actually spent on health. He promised to write to me with that update. I don't believe that has happened. So maybe you have those figures. If you do, give them to me, or otherwise make sure that does happen, can you?
I don't have those figures in front of me, but yes, that has been an oversight on our behalf, and we will certainly, if we have not already provided that response, we will look to do that as quickly as we can.
Thank you. The second question was, going forward on the Victims' Pension Fund, has there been any change on who will be funding that long term?
No, we're still in dispute with the Treasury. We're still going through that process with them.
And is that a formalised dispute process or just a negotiation?
No, it's a formalised dispute process. So it has. We've went through the official stage, and it's now with ministers. So the Chief Secretary is considering that, and if that's not successful, then we can take it to the Joint Ministerial Council. So we're still working through that process.
And from past experience, what's the normal time frame for that sort of thing?
It's not a process we have been through that frequently, so I'm afraid I don't have any idea for the time frame. At this point in time, the Chief Secretary, there has been correspondence at ministerial level. The Chief Secretary has committed to look at it, so we're just waiting for that concluding. In the interim, we're keen to make sure that the funding is provided to victims and there's no uncertainty there.
Just a quick one, Joanne. Just another quick one on that in the Victims' Pension Scheme. I think we were due to start paying out in November. Are we saying that that's not going to happen because we're still in dispute with the Treasury about who's paying for it?
No, absolutely not, Chair. The money has been set aside for this year, so if there's any delay in payments, it's not down to the funding, and we will look to provide that funding while the dispute is ongoing. So absolutely, the dispute with Treasury is not going to be impacting victims.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, John. Jim?
Yet again, we have a situation where more capital has been given back into the central pool than has been bid for. If we didn't tell anybody, could you slip that into revenue to meet the pressures? I mean, surely if you've got
a pot... old-fashioned honesty, John.
But surely, be a bit more serious about it. We wouldn't tell, honestly, we wouldn't. But being serious, what's the sense in having that surplus sitting there when there's so many demands on resource that could be met by using that, in the sense that if you've met all of the demand, what legal obligation are you therefore not that you can't move it?
We can't, because we're constrained by the Treasury's public expenditure rules, which do not allow you to convert money from capital to resource. We can put resource money into capital if we wish to do so, but we can't move it in the opposite direction. And that is, those rules are set by Treasury, and it's because of the impact on their fiscal rules. And I suppose in some ways it's Treasury borrowed to fund spending, and while it's acceptable to borrow in normal circumstances to borrow to fund a capital asset which will last you 25 years, it's not generally acceptable to borrow to fund your day-to-day spending. But it's Treasury's rules, and much as we may like to subvert those rules, we really can't.
Yes, but that assumed a situation where there was a deficit in the capital funding available. But you're actually sitting in a pot of money here that you can't spend on capital items.
Well, I suppose firstly 2 things. We have borrowing there, so if we can't spend the money on if we have capital unallocated, we will reduce the borrowing, and therefore we will save on our resource costs. But 2, the Treasury are looking at the overall picture, not whether or not we can spend the money. In Treasury's eyes, if we can't spend the capital, we can carry forward up to a certain limit, and if we can't carry it forward, then Treasury would be quite happy with that because it saves them some money.
Right. Now, a more detailed question. Most of this distribution is a result of Barnett consequences of decisions made at Westminster, so to some extent it's a bit of a windfall. I presume then that departments already, before this was even known, had their shopping list of pressures that they wish to be met. Now, normally they wouldn't have been met at this stage, so is that going to free up money in future monitoring rounds, in the sense that some of the demand will be soaked up as a result of the Barnett consequential money, and therefore there'll be extra in January, which can be used to meet some of the pressures that are so evident.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any insight into what departments may surrender in January. I mean, the Barnett consequentials that came were mostly for health, or in fact, entirely for health, and health services, we know, was facing unprecedented pressures, and the money did go to health, so we wouldn't expect that would actually free up anything in other departments. I think our hope at this stage is that departments will take action to manage within the budgets they have. I wouldn't be expecting a huge windfall in January monitoring, but we won't know until we get to, as Jeff said earlier, the end of December, beginning of January.
But you have allocated to some other departments, and that normally that level of money would not be available at this stage. So does that take the pressure off in January?
I think departments would be very keen to point out that we didn't allocate enough to cover all of their pressures, and that some of those pressures will remain going forward. Departments are also facing, like the public is, increased energy costs, etc. So I don't think we're going to have a windfall in January monitoring.
Oh dear. Okay.
So I may be proved wrong.
Okay.
Okay.
Keith.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, Joanna, I think it's Anna as well. My question relates to financial transactions capital. I think there's a figure of £66 million approximately. What has the uptake in the past been in that figure, year on year, and what happens to that figure now? So let's say nothing happens between now and then in March, where does that figure go? So basically, what has happened previous years, and is that figure sort of a normal figure, and what happens in the future if that figure is not used?
So in terms of previous years, we would have run for a number of years with some unallocated financial transaction capital. I think the committee are very well aware of that position going forward. Whenever we come to the end of the financial year, should that not be utilised, it'll be surrendered back to Treasury. It's imperative that, as the Minister has requested his ministerial colleagues, that all departments look for ways to utilise this funding, because it represents a lost opportunity if we aren't able to provide loans to or equity investment in the private sector with that funding.
Jeff, what figure is that approximately year on year? What sort of figure is that every year, roughly?
I'm not aware of the precise figure, but we can get you that.
Okay, so just to know what available figure was there, what was used, and then it'll give us sort of an indication of the uptake. Obviously, the uptake, I presume, this year is not good. And are you expecting anything happening between now and March?
So we have about, I think it's around the same level of funding. Let me just find it. It's around the same level of funding out with departments at the minute. So there's about 68.1 million on track for spend this financial year. But obviously, we've had additional money come back through the budget exchange scheme and through the 12.6 that was mentioned earlier on in terms of the launch funding return from Treasury. So additional funding has come in that we have been unable to spend so far. So the Strategic Investment Board are looking at different projects with departments on different ways in which we can spend that. It just very much depends on the timeline of those projects and how quickly business cases can be put together and funding can be issued and utilised. So I suspect that we'll not be looking at allocating all of that in January monitoring.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. Thanks very much, Nate. Matthew, you want to come in first?
Yeah, I just want to very briefly clarify on the question of making an overcommitment. Joanne had mentioned, first of all, that the Finance Minister doesn't make allocations, that he makes recommendations to the Executive. The Minister makes that point himself in the dispatch box. That's a factual point. He is the Finance Minister, and technically, yes, he does make recommendations. That's accepted. But it is factually the case that he could have recommended to the Executive that they make an overcommitment in order to pay for the bid made by his party colleague, the Communities Minister, to provide £55 million to prevent the universal credit cut happening until the end of the financial year. Just to be perfectly factually accurate, the Finance Minister was in his power to make that recommendation to the Executive. That's correct?
I mean,
technically, sorry, Jeff, technically, the Finance Minister could make that recommendation, but it was being financially imprudent. I draw your attention again to the level of pressures being identified by departments. the fact that we've only one more monitoring round to go before the end of the year, and the expectation that we will get additional funding is very low. So to make an overcommitment when you have no concept that that overcommitment will be covered in January monitoring would be irresponsible of any finance minister today.
Well, I take your point, but just factually, the point is that he could have made that. It had been implied that he couldn't have done it. He could have made that recommendation, and obviously he chose to make recommendations on other allocations. I'm not saying whether those are the right or wrong ones, but certainly we've obviously made our position clear. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and I would also like to make the position clear that had he done so, it would have been against the advice of his officials at this stage in the year, because we do have a duty to come within the Treasury controls by the end of the year. And what would have happened if we breached Treasury controls, Treasury will reduce that money from next year's budget, so that would have exacerbated the issue.
But we are still in the middle of the financial year.
We are coming close to the end of the financial year. We have one more monitoring round to go. We have no expectation of getting high level of funding through Barnett, and departments are predicting significant pressures, and departments indeed have been very vocal about those pressures that they're facing, particularly because of rising energy costs. Jeff, I think you might want to jump in there.
Of course, one of those bids was made by the Communities Minister and would have helped pay for rising energy costs anyway.
Your point, indeed. Go ahead, Jeff, you're going to say something about rising energy costs.
Sorry, Chair,
the bid for Northern Ireland Water needs an extra 1.5 million.
Yes, sorry, Chair, just on that one as well, one of the issues that I kind of addressed or tried to address in my opening statement was around the ring-fenced resource tail, where we have an additional £21 million of pressure. And that's another thing that if we aren't able to control that within the ring-fenced resource tail control tool that we have, it then is a further call on our non-ring-fenced resource tail. So that's another element to the assessment that we would be doing around levels of overcommitment had we done that.
Okay. Philip, you wanted to come in?
Given we're putting things on the record.
Come on, we've got an election coming. Of course, everybody's putting everything on the record.
It's clear we have an election coming. I know Matthew and his colleagues tried to land blows on this subject.
Not at
all. They weren't able to do so.
Through the chair. I'm giving everybody a lot of latitude.
Well, they weren't able to do so. We've factually put the record. Because there was a number of things said that were inaccurate. They have been cleared up today and put in the record. Not that Matthew or Pat are going to take my advice, but I suggest that they stop digging in this matter, because the hole that they're creating is just getting deeper.
Okay, thank you very much.
To fall into.
We've all had our 30-second sound bites for Twitter. It's all been done. Congratulations, well done, team. Okay, Jeff, Joanne, Anne, thank you very much. Sorry I didn't get to hear from you, Anne, but thank you very much indeed for coming along as well. And no doubt we'll be talking again fairly soon. Okay, thanks, team. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks,
Chair.
Cheers.
Thanks, Chair.
Next item, just to say, it's an item of correspondence. Is the committee content to write to the Department seeking sight of the unique circumstances and bid made by the departments to the Department of Finance, as indicated in the letter from the Department for the Economy, page 177. Our members are happy to take this one forward? Agreed. And
number 6.
Now we move to item number 6. Thank you, everybody on the committee, for forbearance. Defamation Bill. Have we got Michael and Martin?
We have them on audio but not video.
Can they hear us okay? Michael, Martin, yes, can you hear us?
Yeah, can hear.
Excellent.
I can hear you.
That's fine, excellent. Sorry about moving back and forth. We've had a bit of an IT mare today, but such is life. Team, the next item of the agenda is the Defamation Bill committee stage evidence from the Department for Finance. The committee will now receive an oral and written briefing from the Department on the Defamation Bill. We've got Michael Foster, who's Head of Civil Law Reform Division, and Martin Tyrrell, Principal Legal Officer, Civil Law Reform Department of Finance. I don't think we've had either of the two of you in front of the committee before yet, have we?
No, Chair. I think that's probably unusual. It's been an unusual period, obviously, but this is indeed the first time we've been in front of you during this mandate.
Oh, well, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Following papers are relevant to this agenda item. The Clerk's briefing paper is at page 18. Department's briefing paper at page 24. Previous response from the Minister of Finance in relation to the Defamation Bill at page 38. A copy of the Defamation Bill at page 41. The excellent raises paper in the Defamation Bill at page 77. And at page 3 of the tabled items, there is a copy of the alternate bill from the Scott report and a relevant extract from the 2017 Gillen Review of Civil Law. Just want to say this evidence session has been reported by Hansard. Michael, are you leading off?
Yes, Chair.
Over to you, please.
Thank you. Chair, given that this is indeed the first time we've appeared in front of you during this mandate, I thought it might assist the committee if I briefly set out what we do. I head up a very small unit that is housed within Departmental solicitors, and it's a policy office which until recently comprised of myself and Martin, although last year we added another member of staff. So between what is now the three of us, we are essentially tasked with the rather broad remit of examining civil law and providing advice to the Minister across a pretty wide range of policy areas. Just by way of example, our current work includes a large commitment around marriage law, and we recently brought to the committee's attention a proposed consultation, which is in fact launching very soon on belief marriage and age of marriage. And I'm sure we'll no doubt appear in front of the committee again as the policy proposals in that are developed and finalised. And we've previously undertaken work and provided advice on a variety of other issues relating to marriage law over the last number of years. We also have policy responsibility for private family law, and I represent the department on the Shadow Family Justice Board. And amongst other things, we're currently working through live issues relating to parental responsibility and parenthood, and we frequently input into other areas relating to private law matters. And if that's not enough, we also have remit for private international law, where we're currently engaging with other colleagues on a range of issues. Also on property law, we brought forward secondary legislation to the committee earlier this year on the administration of estates. And just to complete the picture, we also have responsibility for the law of tort. And as that falls within our bailiwick, therefore defamation, which is a tort, also falls into it. So we're a small office, but we've got a pretty broad portfolio, which obviously means we need to prioritise our limited resources in an effective way. So, with your permission, Chair, I just want to turn to the specific issue of the bill, the Defamation Bill, which is in front of the committee at the moment.
Yes, please.
So, I mean, this bill, I'm working on defamation, generally predates both Martin and I's time in this post. As you know, this has been sort of ongoing for quite a number of years now. There was considerable activity back in 2012, 2013 when the Act in England and Wales was under consideration. And obviously we've had the Northern Ireland Law Commission examine this, and then the very important Dr. Scott report, which was commissioned and completed and delivered to the department in the middle of 2016. So, given that we're now in 2021, I can understand why, on the face of it, the question can legitimately be asked why nothing substantive has been taken forward by the department. Mm-hmm. And I hope I can answer that in a reasonably candid way. So, the report from Dr. Scott arrived not long after what was then the new mandate began, and as I understand it, officials who were then in the office were considering that report and it provided advices to the then Finance Minister, and were developing early proposals around it. And then obviously we were faced then at the start of 2017 with some of the difficulties that led to the institutions not functioning for a while, and during that time with Brexit and other essential work taking precedence, non-essential project work within my office was placed on hold, so no real meaningful work was carried out in that area during that time. And then on the return of ministers, we provided initial advice across the range of matters which I've just described to you within our portfolio, and that included defamation law. And the minister had indicated that he was keen to explore defamation law with the overarching policy goal of the balance of the freedom of expression with the protection of reputation. And at that stage, he felt that the 2013 Act in England and Wales didn't necessarily achieve that in the way that he would hope, and he was aware of work that was ongoing elsewhere, and that included...
So, Michael, just to cut across you there, and apologise for that, but so what particular areas did he not think that it met? that was different from the sort of the English legislation or the English and Welsh legislation?
Well, I think that the key thing for the Minister was the fact that the ongoing review in the South was looking very closely at, amongst other things, the key issue in his mind was the extension of social media into our world, which had been, almost meteoric in terms of what the landscape looked like in 2013, or 2012, 2013, when the English were looking at their provisions. And I think there was a general concern that the 2013 Act maybe wouldn't achieve the goals that were, in his mind, set out in terms of that balance. I think that the challenges that were prevalent in 2013 are more so now with the growth of social media, because social media has essentially provided a much greater opportunity for publication injurious to reputation without necessarily pertaining to any public interest or meeting the standards of responsible journalism. And, a legislator considering reform now in 2021, I think will have, and does have, a more challenging goal or aim to strike the proper target of protecting free speech in the public interest, which the Minister, is fully, alive to and thinks is a welcome goal. But in doing so in a way which doesn't promote low-value speech that unjustly interferes with reputation. So I think our analysis of the 2013 Act was that, whilst some of it was to be welcomed, there were aspects of it which, and I think this comes out quite clearly from some of the responses that the committee has already received from the call for evidence, that it's not a panacea in terms of reform. So we had been looking at that, and would liaise with colleagues elsewhere, including in the South, to see that what work they were doing, simply because theirs was going to probably provide an up-to-date view on some of those issues with interest to us. But then, of course, in March 2020, as we all know, the pandemic struck and essentially resources were diverted. I personally was working on a number of COVID policy issues, and our colleagues in Dublin indicated that their review was effectively placed on hold. So, while we were obviously keen to make some progress, there were a number of factors that effectively prevented much substantive work in this area.
Okay, thanks.
As to the bill itself, I mean, we've provided a briefing paper which sort of sets out in some detail the PMB and the taken place over the last number of years. And, obviously from the outset we were aware that Mike Nesbitt was had a private member's bill a number of years back from 2013. And while no one currently working in this office had any exposure to it or interaction to it, we were aware that one had previously been prepared, and it was annexed to Dr. Scott's report, and we had sight of it. I think what maybe took us a little bit more by surprise was its revival and the manner of its revival. We were essentially only informed a few days before introduction by colleagues in TEO that the bill was going to be introduced and had a slot secured in the Assembly. And it was the first time, really, as departmental officials that we were aware of that. And also, I think the fact that the bill, the 2021 bill in front of you at the moment, was, bar some very minor technical tinkering, exactly the same as the one drafted for England Wales in 2013. Now, leaving aside the fact that this is a different jurisdiction, and that's not to say that the 2013 Act, would not work here. But I think a broader concern that we had as a department, that because there had been quite a lot happening in relation to this area since 2013, we've effectively had eight years or so of the Act in 2013 in England and Wales, and there's been quite a bit of opportunity to examine the lessons learned. We've also had 8 years in which there's been that marked expansion of the use of social media, which I've already referred to, and a huge increase in the number and types of social media apps. We've had 8 years in which obviously the Law Commission has considered this, Dr. Scott has reported, and the Review of Civil Justice led by Sir John Gillan has considered this issue. and other jurisdictions have developed their thinking. So I think those are the types of things we would have been expecting to have been considered in developing fresh legislation and adapting it really for the best fit for this jurisdiction.
Michael, just to sort of close that particular aspect of it off. I mean, we've had 8 years of lessons identified from the legislation in sort of England, and is there anything that you could point to that has happened over the 8 years there that it's run through that would be in would substantially change your view on the 2021 bill?
Well, I mean, those are aspects of detail which I was coming to next. But now that you've directly asked that question, I think that Dr. Scott last week, I think, when pressed on the centre point of this bill is effectively the serious harm test, and to maybe a different extent, and I'd be loath to use the word lesser extent, but to a different extent, the decision to move from trial by jury as the presumption to trial by judge as the presumption. And when those two are taken together, the lessons that seem to be coming from the English legislation is that, and this is where the principal concern of the Minister is that, on one analysis, it would appear that the bar for the man on the street is now considerably higher. And, on the jury side, the aspects there that relate to the particular issues relating to this jurisdiction in terms of jury trials is another one where, the Minister has indicated that he has concerns around. So, the English Act, I think, was designed with the main aim of promoting freedom of expression whilst trying at the same time to protect reputations. And it would appear from some of the commentary that we have analysed on the serious harm test in particular that pendulum may have swung a little bit too much in relation to freedom of expression. But that said, the Department recognises and the Minister recognises that is a policy choice. And, that is one of the issues which I think the purpose of this analysis by the committee will seek to look at in a bit more detail. And, all of those policy considerations, I think are all legitimate, both from the perspective where, should there be a serious harm test or should there not? Should there be jury trials? Should there not? And the level and extent to which social media protections should be amended. Each and every one of those have got arguments on both sides of the debate. I think that our preference throughout all of this was that we would have taken a considered view and developed a bill from first principles that would have dealt with the concerns that the Minister and the Department had. But we accept equally that we are where we are with this and that the bill is now has been passed. Its general principles have been accepted by the Assembly at second reading. And therefore, as a department, the Minister has indicated to us that he does not wish to present any obstacles in relation to the future progress of this bill.
Sorry, just say that again, please, Michael.
Sorry,
the minister. Now that we've reached this,
the Minister has no desire to fix any obstacles in relation to the future progress of this bill. The Minister, other than I think that from our perspective, we want to ensure that nothing in the bill does damage to the statute book, if you like, for want of a better description. And on that point, there are a number of technical aspects to the 2013 bill, or the 2021 bill in front of you at the minute, which replicates the 2013 Act, which will require attention. But from a broader policy perspective, the Department is content to keep a watching brief on how the committee's deliberations play out and see how that work progresses.
Michael, are you considering putting in any amendments to the bill?
No, we're not. other than, you know, we're certainly on hand to provide advice to you on certain technical aspects as exist in the bill at the moment. So just by way of example, the bill is drafted at the moment in a manner that is inconsistent with the decision of the British government to leave the EU. Clause 9 is not fit for purpose. It wouldn't work. It would need to be amended. And, you know, we think that that's something that can be discharged by the Bill Office, but we're happy to you know, provide any assistance that we can on that. I think there are also a number of minor technical drafting changes that would probably be recommended, but those wouldn't affect the policy in any way. They are very much, you know, technical drafting to take into account how Northern Irish legislation is drafted as compared to English legislation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks very much, Steve. Matthew?
Thank you. Just in practical terms, you mentioned some the two broad things are that there's a specific concern around removal of jury, removal of jury and replacement of judge, and then also the question of it basically keeping pace with technological change and social media, etc. Could you go into a little more detail about the issues you think have cropped up with the English legislation, because it was drafted before the explosion, or you know, as the explosion in social media was happening? What are the specific issues that you think are addressed in this bill that have cropped up in England?
Well, I mean, Dr. Scott himself, I'll take that. I think there's maybe two limbs to that through the chair. The first one being the issue of social media. The provisions within the bill at the moment, at Section 5 and Section 10, serve essentially to give protection to social media sites. And Dr. Scott has been in his report very critical of those, to the extent where his recommendations are that Section 5 should be removed from the bill and revised Section 10 should be brought up. You know, I think if we're looking at that in a bit more detail, you know, there's some evidence to suggest that in 2013, or certainly some commentary to suggest in 2013 that whilst there was, you know, clearly there was social media out there, there wasn't the same level or use. I mean, just to give by way of example, at the moment it is estimated that there are approximately 4.5 billion users now of social media in 2021, and that has risen in quite dramatic terms since this bill was brought out, the English legislation was brought out in 2012 and 13. So, you know, we feel that the margin of error has increased, and that the challenge to strike that balance between the protection of you know, the public interest, etc., is slightly more balanced than making sure that we don't promote low-value speech of the type that really does tend to interfere with reputation. And because there are so many more opportunities maybe now compared to than there were in 2013 to do that, you know, that I think is a concern that comes through thematically from those with an interest in this subject. Now, that's not to say there aren't ways to deal with that. You know, I think if we were looking at a bill from first principles, you know, we obviously are keen to see what comes from the South, because this is a specific issue that forms part of the terms of reference of their review. But we also have seen what Scotland have done just this year in terms of the Defamation and Malicious Publication Bill, which has now received royal assent and is now an act. and there are aspects of that which we might have wanted to consider to bring across into our own legislation. On the specific issue of trial by jury, which you also mentioned there, I think that the Minister simply has raised the concern that in the context of this jurisdiction, where the importance of direct public involvement in such issues, I think, as the Civil Justice Review said, should never be underestimated. That there's just a worry there that to leave issues relating, particularly when you measure them with serious harm, is a judge on his own or her own the very best person to deal with what constitutes serious harm for a man on the street, or indeed anyone in other walks of life. And it was interesting to note that that reform, which is after the 2013 Act and which is after the work by Dr. Scott, the review basically came up with a different suggestion there, and that was that a judge's powers under the Judicature Act, which is already referenced in the bill, instead of removing the presumption of trial by jury, the powers under that Act could be expressly expanded to include a broad discretion to order trial without a jury in matters of exceptional complexity, for example. But we also recognise that on the other side of that debate, there are, there's a certain degree of commentary that would suggest that the removal of a trial by jury has other benefits. But ultimately those may be overstated. I mean, equally we have seen that the removal of the sort of test for serious harm to an earlier part of the process and not being tried by jury has led to effectively a number, or sort of an upsurge in preliminary trials, if you like, in cases, and the costs in those, certainly from some of the evidence that we have seen, can be very, very high. So I think the Civil Justice Review team noted that if the aim of the 2013 Act was to simplify and to reduce costs, that might not necessarily be the outcome of the 2013 Act.
Okay. Is there not is there a slight risk about inflate? I mean, there are for obvious good historical reasons, particular sensitivities people have around this, but is there not a slight danger about conflating criminal and civil here? Because obviously, we are talking about something that's the right to jury trial in a criminal context is obviously very precious and important, and that's where most of the sensitivity has been in this jurisdiction for very obvious reasons. So there's a slight risk that we're kind of conflating a question here when there are obviously other areas of civil and commercial law where there aren't juries. Is there a slight risk that we're introducing a sensitivity where there doesn't necessarily need to be one? I'm just asking that question.
And, as I said earlier in my remarks, that's an entirely legitimate policy point and an entirely legitimate view. I mean, I don't think the Department is, saying that jury trials must stay in defamation cases only. And it is, you're right to point out that it is the one area of the civil law where a jury trial is the presumption. But we have to put on record the fact that the Minister has indicated that he has those concerns that it needs to be properly thought through.
Okay. On the question about, one of the I have declared an interest, Chair, at the start because I'm Chair of the All-Party Group on Press Freedom, and we've done a call for evidence. We're finalising a report on, which touches on the sustainability of media, and one of the consistent messages that comes from particularly small media is that our defamation laws in Northern Ireland are especially have a particular chilling effect on their reporting, and also, can have at times a devastating effect on their financial position, and that has a vicious cycle, can have a vicious cycle effect in terms of their willingness to take sometimes necessary risks or steps in terms of reportage. So, how much of that have you looked at? I mean, would the department acknowledge that we have a particular challenge here with the defamation laws having the perception of a chilling effect on local media, and that having a knock-on effect on potentially on the sustainability of those titles, but also therefore on the kind of the civic democratic space that we for which we rely on media, particularly local media, for who are doing things like reporting on court hearings and local council stuff that's even more sort of small ball than the vast heights of the Storm and Finance Committee.
Well, I mean, in relation to the issue of the potential chilling effect on small media organisations, the simple answer is yes. The Department is alive to that argument. It has been well rehearsed and well made by a number of interested parties from the media side, and on the counterbalance to that, others made different arguments. I mean, I don't think anybody particularly, nobody to see small media organisations, struggling with the legislative framework around this at all. The question is, how do we fix it in a way that assists them in a meaningful way? Some of the commentary around the 2013 Act would probably tend to suggest that it hasn't really had as big an effect on the freedom of expression as one might expect. But then again, there are others who champion it as being the way in which press and others have been able to report in a different way. And again, it leads me back to the points I've made, that these are essentially policy choices to make, and whether you take the serious harm test and whether you're convinced that the serious harm test, taken together with the other aspects of the bill, will have the effect of lessening that impact on freedom of expression, but not in a way that overfaces the protection of people's reputations, then it's a legitimate policy position to arrive at.
One final question, then, but specifically, I mean, some people would argue that Northern Ireland is in an even more kind of unreformed, kind of chilling position from the perspective of, for example, publishers than England and Wales were in 2011 pre-bill or 2012. Would you say it's the case that, or is it a fair comment that, given here we have smaller, more often we have more family-owned, small publishers, media organisations, so if there is a chilling effect, it's more likely to have a disproportionate effect here, because like, for example, most local and regional newspaper titles in England, in many cases they're owned by Northcliffe or whatever they're called now, the various the what was Mirror Group Reach, I think it's called now. So would you acknowledge the point I'm making, that there are, in a sense, there are smaller operators here, so if there is a chilling effect, it's even more disproportionately it's even potentially more disproportionate here because they're smaller and more financially vulnerable?
I can certainly see the the academic force behind that argument. It certainly makes some sort of logical sense. However, it's also, and I think the overall difficulty about reform in this area is that we are essentially a lot of the material that we have to consider is anecdotal, and that is based on the fact that the number of cases actually that reach court for defamation are very low, and that may well be because publishers are not prepared to take the risk with their money in terms of defending cases. But I suppose from our perspective, we would have expected if in 2013 legislation was passed in a neighbouring jurisdiction with a very similar historical defamation law background. That in the 8 years have preceded, that if our jurisdiction was a lot more claimant friendly, that a lot more actions would have been brought here, and that simply hasn't been borne out by the evidence in the last 8 years. We haven't certainly any statistical or hard facts to suggest that Northern Ireland has become some sort of libel capital even within these islands. And in fact, the numbers of cases for defamation writs seems to have, if nothing, dropped off.
But isn't it also the case that, in a sense, that could prove the opposite point, which is that because the law is so, or perceived to be, if it is claimant friendly in the way that many people would argue, the bill sponsor I think would, that the fact that lots of cases aren't, I mean, you have this, if various people are stating it, presumably, they're small newspaper owners, I don't think are necessarily making this up off the top of their head, and the fact that lots of cases aren't going to court might be an indication that actually the legal provision, if the legal provision was robust, then more people would feel, more publishers would trust a system of going to court and having the court test it, whereas what's happening is, potentially, allegedly, lots of this stuff is happening. Writs are not even being issued because lawyers are able to issue letters and it's just not worth the while. So in a sense, the fact of not going to court might prove the point that it is more claimant friendly because it's having that chilling effect.
Well, look, I mean, again, it's difficult to argue against that from the anecdotal perspective. Again, the difficulty that we have to an extent is that, when I said going to court, maybe I should have been slightly more elegant in saying that it was the number of writs issued. Yes. But I take your point. I do take your point that it could be that the number of writs issued doesn't necessarily match the number of threats to take writs, as you pointed out. And that point has been well made and well rehearsed. What I would say is this. I would ask if any of the committee have the time to do so to catch up on the Red Lines podcast that Mark Carruthers had with the bill sponsor and with Sam McBride and Paul Tweed, who I'm sure are names familiar to the committee in the context of defamation law.
Thankfully, I've never had a letter from him.
Yet.
Clearly, I'm not doing my job. Sorry, go ahead.
At the risk of misreporting him in that, I found it interesting that Paul Tweed indicated that, he hadn't any significant business in this jurisdiction over the last number of years, that most of his work was focused on London and in Dublin, but that if this bill was to come in here as law, that might change, because in his view, the serious harm test effectively would allow a lot more scope in terms of preliminary issues, and some of the and again it's anecdotal evidence, but some of the anecdotal evidence on the other side of the coin would suggest that the costs of those can mount up very, very significantly. So again, it takes me back to my sort of general point that these are balances, these are policy choices. We need to and from the department's perspective, we would have ideally liked to have worked these through over the next number of months so that we would have been in a position early in the next mandate to think about a bespoke bill for this jurisdiction. But, we know that this bill is now up and running, so we can see how that plays out.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. And just for information, we have Mr. Tweed and Mr. McBride are coming before the committee before the end of the year.
Okay.
End of November. Okay. Jim?
Yeah, good afternoon. I have to confess, you've left me rather confused as to the department's position on this bill. You identify a number of issues, and sometimes it's difficult to know whether, I suppose you're speaking on behalf of the Minister, but that the Minister has concerns, for example, about the fundamental clause of Clause 1 about serious harm. he has concerns about the adequacy of the bill insofar as social media has moved on. And yet you tell us that, notwithstanding those concerns, the Minister is neither going to stand in the way of the bill, nor the Department is going to seek to amend the bill. Yeah, if you have concerns, why would you not seek to express them through amendment?
Okay, I think there's a number of points to that. I mean, from a practical perspective, to amend this bill in a significant way would require considerable resource, both from this office and from, if we were moving them as executive amendments, from the Office of the Legislative Counsel. And my understanding is that office is already extremely pressed with executive work over the short remaining period of this mandate. I think, being frank about it, if this bill had been introduced in, say, for example, this time last year, and we had a considerable period of time in which we could usefully develop policy in conjunction with the committee and with the bill sponsor, then the Minister might have been able to present those concerns in a material way. But I think the Minister is keen for our work at the departmental level to continue on defamation law generally. We do want to see what comes from the South. We want to consider in a bit more detail how the Scottish bill, or the Scottish Act as it now is, works in practice over the next year.
Yes, but your work in the Department, if this bill proceeds, is going to be bypassed by this bill. So why would you not take the opportunity to, in your view, improve the bill, rather than churlishly sit back and say, well, we're taking nothing to do with it and do whatever you like? That seems to be the attitude.
Well, I think, if you look at where the Minister's concerns are, and you've highlighted those, particularly around, jury trials, serious harm, and social media, those are certainly the serious harm test, in our view, is effectively what this bill is built around.
Yes, I agree.
If you take out the serious harm test,
yes,
then this bill is largely, I would be loath to use the word meaningless, but it would certainly lose the anticipated effect that those who are bringing the bill wish it to do. So that general principle has already been agreed by the Assembly at second reading.
With the help of the Minister, because the Minister didn't oppose the second reading. That's part of the source of my confusion. If you think this bill is inopportune in its timing, etc., then why did the Minister sit on his hands when the principles of the bill were being approved?
Well, I think that the feeling in the House on that day was that there was sufficient support amongst others in the Assembly and other parties in the Assembly that the bill would proceed. I'm not a politician, so I can't answer the sort of general question, in terms of the politics of it.
Yes, but as a department, you give advice to the Minister, which then manifests itself in actions. Is the advice to the Minister then sit back and do nothing here?
I mean, our preference has been that we would develop our own legislation from first principles.
But isn't that going to be bypassed as this bill progresses, if it passes?
Well, I suppose to an extent that is right, but at the same time, if this bill passes and becomes the Defamation Act 2022, it's still open for the department over the course of the next 2-3 years to amend legislation and to bring forward a Defamation Act 2024, 2025.
Driven by Dublin.
Able to work, and not certainly by no means our preferred way to work.
But a lot of what you're saying seems to be predicated on, let's see what Dublin's going to do. Is there a dearth of authentic thinking within the department to the point where you have to wait and see what a foreign jurisdiction is going to do?
No. The reason for waiting, or not waiting for Dublin, but looking to see with interest what they do, is that the themes that they have developed are very much on a par with what the themes in relation to defamation law across all of these islands are seeking to do. So, as I indicated in my opening remarks, I mean, we have to prioritise our own resources in a very small office, and we have got X number of different policy areas that we are currently working on, and where we get the opportunity to learn and reflect upon developments in neighbouring jurisdictions, and we find it useful to do that. We're not by any stretch of the imagination suggesting that what the Dublin government bring forward in their review will form the centre point of any change that we would be recommending, but we would take those ones on board, reflect on them, analyse them, and consider them in the round with, for example, what the Scots have done this year, and also there's a review imminent of the Defamation Act in England and Wales itself. So, all of those are things that we could throw into the pot in relation to developing our own policy thinking on it.
Sorry, Michael, the chair here, just to go on this. I mean, right at the beginning, you said that the Minister, because it's gone through its second reading and the rest of it, is not going to oppose the progress of the bill. And then when I said, you've obviously done quite a work to come before this committee that we're very grateful for. So you've obviously done a lot of the sort of the staffing work to do with this. Now, obviously, if we want to make the bill better so it's more fit for purpose, you've obviously got some concerns. But you've also stated that you're not proposing to put in any amendments. Could I ask you to reconsider that? Because you've obviously done a lot of thinking about this. You've obviously done a lot of consideration into this. And I think that, as a committee, just looking around the committee here, with your very valued expertise in what you've done so far, I think it would be quite opposite for you to consider putting in an amendment. I know you probably have to ask the Minister for his approval to do that. But the fact is, you've identified that the fact that we do need some specific legislation. We have spent a long time getting to the point where we are now. There is a real issue here that we can actually, you can actually improve this sort of legislative process, and we can get something that can go through the sort of the Assembly that it's, close on the 80% solution rather than the sort of just over the 50% solution.
I mean, those are valid points, Chair, and from my own perspective, I'm certainly open to its consideration. What I would say is that if our view was, for example, that just to give by way of example, if we were to take the view that the Minister's concerns on the serious harm test are such that he wanted to remove that clause, then in our view that would effectively knock out the effect of this bill. If you're asking us to assist around the margins, then I'm sure that we could potentially work with the committee to do that. But I think we also have to recognise that the Minister is in the tail end of a mandate with a lot of pressing business, and I can't answer as an official that at this point in time that I can give that commitment to develop this bill in a way that you've set out.
Well, could I ask you this? Serious harm, and actually I agree that serious harm is the wrong way to go in this bill, but anyhow, could I ask the Department, has that always been the consistent view of the Department? Because was it not the case that some years back the Department favoured bringing in effectively the 2013 bill?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know the answer to that directly.
No, I'm neither. My understanding is that we had the Scott report, which gave qualified support for the 2013 Act. Dr. Scott proposed certain replications, some modifications, and some innovations to the 2013 Act. I don't recall a period when a minister in the department supported straightforward replication.
When Simon Hamilton was minister? Were there not indications of support?
At the time, Simon Hamilton's reaction was to commission the NILC consultation, which led on to Dr. Scott's report. And by the time Dr. Scott's report was delivered in June 2016, we were into a new mandate which did not progress. We know then after that there were 3 years when very little happened on the policy front. So I don't recall a time when the department was unequivocally behind the 2013 Act.
I see. So really, the department's position flip-flops according to who the minister is, obviously.
Unfair. You don't have to, Nigel. You don't have to answer that one. I've already remonstrated with the very honourable member for North Antrim on that particular one. You're quite happy to do that as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Keith.
I'm back.
Okay, thanks, Michael Martin. I think it was Michael, I presume, at the start on most of the talking, when you referred to the man or woman on the street, and that this would not assist them. Is that still your opinion, that this bill is not going to assist the average man or woman on the street?
Well, it's difficult to see from an academic perspective how it will. The current test for someone bringing a defamation claim is not one in which they have to show serious harm. And, I think that for an ordinary person to be able to prove particularly in relation to if it's taken in tandem with the provision to effectively place that decision in the hands of a judge only and not a jury, then proving serious harm for any particular individual who is not, for example, in some sort of position of authority or doesn't have a profile within society, etc., is going to be more difficult.
So, is this bill in its current format, as it is today, fit for purpose?
I mean, the bill will work. I mean, if this bill becomes law,
whose favour will it work in? Or work for?
Well, I mean, it looks on the face of it that it will certainly tip the balance in favour of those who wish to express their views, as opposed to tipping it in favour of those who wish to protect their reputations. But I think that's broadly accepted by those who wish to bring it, that they do wish to tip the balance in that favour, because the view is that the balance is currently shifted the other way.
So I'm going to ask you maybe a question. I don't know why I should ask it, but I'll ask it anyway. Would you vote for this bill?
I am giving you an awful amount of leeway because you're the vice chair there.
I think my answer to that is that I'm grateful to be an official at that point.
And maybe just another question that'll be a bit more straightforward, hopefully. What can journalists or the media not do today if they're telling the truth?
Well, if they're telling the truth, then they should have nothing to fear from any action brought against them, whether it's under the current law or under any revised law. The defence of truth, or as it's known at the moment, the common law defence of justification, which this defence of truth in Clause 2 of the Bill seeks to replace. There's nothing really that has happened in the 8 years of experience of the legislation in England and Wales to suggest that the courts they're not simply applying the principles that applied to a plea of justification to a plea of truth. So, I don't think that this bill will have any effect on people who are telling the truth.
So if you're looking on the past 8 years, whether it be in England or across the world, where is the most defamation law, is it coming from social media or is it coming from written, as in paper documents? So how big is the social media issue in defamation?
Well, I don't have a breakdown of figures in terms of which cases are attracting the most writs in either of those two categories, I'm afraid. But, there's no doubt that over the last 8 years there's been a marked increase in the accessibility, frequency and the amount of use of social media. There seems to be an obvious shift of societal patterns to where they receive their information. Even though like Twitter, Facebook, etc., would have been around in 2012, 2013, the numbers of people using them have increased quite significantly in the intervening time, and particularly so. I can still remember back in the early days of social media and having access to Twitter, that I would still have gone out and bought, one of the local papers to read, and knew of many others who had done the same. Whereas now, a lot more people seem to be accessing those types of articles, which still appear in the written press, but they seem to be downloading them from links, whether it be from Twitter or on the websites themselves.
So just one final point. It says in the Minister's letter dated the 8th of October, I just lost the line, I do not think this bill has the capacity to achieve reform that will be effective. So if the Minister's saying that, why are you not going to amend this bill?
Well, to amend the bill in a way that, we would hope would bring forward change would require a significant, could potentially require a significant rewriting of the bill. And as I said earlier, I don't think that the resource exists to do that at this moment in time, given the very compressed time we have left to consider.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Matthew, very small one.
I will be brief. Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to this point about why not amend it, and as you said, you're reviewing what's happening in the south and in Scotland anyway, and the work of, as you said, the work goes on defamation reform. If that's the case, but you think there's too much work to sort of rewrite the bill, design a bill precisely to your liking now, but defamation reform, what you're implicitly saying, or you're saying is defamation reform still needs to happen, but it needs to be more considered. Would it not make sense to insert a review clause in the legislation that would oblige a review once you have got, based on information gathered from experiences in neighbouring jurisdictions in 18 months after royal assent or 2 years after royal assent, and therefore there would be a kind of, not quite a sunset clause, but a review clause that would enable you to return to it and require you to return to it and the Assembly to return to it?
I've certainly seen similar types of provisions in other pieces of legislation. I can understand, why that might be considered useful. I think, our work will continue on this. As indicated earlier in the piece, we have to balance the rest of the work that falls within our remit to bring forward a bill of this nature. The common rule of thumb is that you need between 18 months and 2 years to develop it properly, get it drafted professionally by the Office of Legislative Counsel, and then take it through the various stages in the Assembly. And, I think if there's probably not an awful lot of point in us trying to, cut around with a couple of the clauses here. These are broader policy issues at play. They would need to be properly developed. The policy proposals would then need to be agreed, probably at executive level, and then we would need to translate those general policy provisions into concrete legislative proposals. Now, given that we're 3 or 4 months away from the guillotine on this, I can't see how it would be a feasible thing to do. But, the idea of having a review clause where the department would, after, say, 2 years after royal assent or 2 years after the provisions come into commencement, You know, I can't see from a principled policy position why that would be a particular issue.
Yeah, that was my question, but rather than rewriting the whole thing, was simply about the. Okay.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Sir Michael Martin, thanks very much. We've got a further couple of questions, but rather than sort of prolong this, do you mind if we write to you and if we could get your response from those as well?
Not at all. We'll try to assist you in whatever way we can, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, team, thank you very much indeed. And may we thank, again, I can thank Michael and Martin for their evidence and coming forward to the committee, and this is the rest of it. Thank you very much indeed. And if we move on to the next item of business, which is correspondence. I find my page. Agenda item 13. The correspondence index is at index of the 6 received items of correspondence is page 289. Or can that? Yes. First item, non-domestic rates revaluation coronavirus bill. Members are asked to note at page 279 a response from the Minister for Finance on the non-domestic rates revaluation coronavirus bill. My letter to the Minister is included at page 290 for information. Is the committee content to write to the Department and seek sight of the impact screening that was undertaken for the bill, which is referenced at page 284? I don't recall that ever being explained to us when we were the Department were speaking to us.
Chairman, could I
Go
come
ahead.
on this? I mean, obviously, an extraordinary procedural change here in that the Minister wrote to us before we wrote to him. Now, I've only been in this building 27 years, so I'm a new boy. Maybe a bit old-fashioned, perhaps, but a new boy. I've never seen that happen before.
Yeah.
I was the Minister in a position to preempt what we were going to ask him. And I read with great interest his response. I still think we're on such dangerous territory here, and I am really quite worried about what we're being asked to do. Though, of course, the decision is not ours. The decision is the House. But I think if we continue to oppose this as a unified committee, it's going to be very difficult for the House to grant accelerated passage. Sometimes it's wrong to do right, and I think this is the case here. And whilst I read with great interest his attempt to preempt us, I still cannot understand why he did not, whilst he didn't consult, why did the Department not at least inform the major players in advance before he was going to do this? I think that's the absolute minimum that's required, given the sweeping nature of this. The retrospective aspect of it I'm still concerned about, and the fact that he actually obviously was listening to what I said, because he mentioned the travel agents, who are one of the businesses most affected, and he made the point that the travel agents, quite rightly, have had a rates holiday for 2 financial years. But the damage that's been done to the travel agency is so fundamental that it will still be in position in April 2022. They will still be carrying huge losses and damage to their businesses. And I am extremely uneasy. Time and time again we've been asked to approve accelerated passage, and time again we say, well, yes, this time, but never again. We understand it has to be done. And I think to some extent the Department's playing upon our goodwill, because they come back with even further demands. Now, I think this is the first time we've ever been asked to grant accelerated passage or agree to accelerated passage for a bill which has retrospective provision and has had no consultation and has had no attempt at even informing the stakeholders.
Yeah.
And I just feel so uneasy about this, and that we're setting such a dangerous precedent for the future.
Yeah.
And I think we need to dig our heels down on this one.
Look, Jim, and I hear very clearly what you say, and my view on it, and it's retrospective legislation. There's been no consultation. There's no right of appeal, and they've added in an accelerated passage to it. I mean, any single one of those things would be raising alarm bells in where we are on this. I think it's something we need to be very cautious about, and something we need to be very considerate about when we're coming to whether we ask our opinion whether we should be supporting accelerated passage or not, whether it goes through the Assembly. And you're quite right, it is the Assembly's call on whether it is or not. But again, that's something that we as a committee need to take very close cognizance of, because I am very unsettled by it. And I do thank the Minister for writing back as quickly as he did, and it was good to see that the officials were listening in very closely to the questions that were raised by the committee, and sort of the very valid questions were raised by the committee, and also the impact as well. But there are a lot of questions here that I think need to be resolved, and I do not want to see something going through that is ill thought out legislation that we're going to regret and rue further on. But I think I'd also like to see what that impact screening is as well. So if we're content, can we write to the we're content to write to the department and agree for the bill to undertake? Sorry, I'll rewrite that again. Is the committee content to write to the department and seek sight of the impact screening that was undertaken in the bill, which is referenced page 284? Are we agreed? Agreed.
Chairperson, just to advise members that the accelerated passage motion is now scheduled for the 23rd
of November.
Then we, as a committee, I feel would need to agree our position on that.
Yes, and I think we'll bring that next week. If we're content, are we content to table that for next week? Agreed. Next item of correspondence, 11.3, Northern Ireland Civil Service Injury Benefit Scheme. Members asked to note at page 293 a further response from the Minister of Finance in relation to the Northern Ireland Civil Service Injury Benefit Scheme, indicating that PTSD claims may be time limited in respect of the date of diagnosis or when the condition impacts on the ability to work. I am quite nervous about that line about indicating that the PSD claims may be from the time limit with respect to the date of diagnosis. I think that is, I have some concerns about that as well. I think I would like to go back to the Department Act for further clarification, because as many people are aware, whereas people will be suffering from PTSD for a particularly long period of time, it takes a long time to be effectively diagnosed, and I would like some more clarity in the Department about what advice and guidance they've taken on that, because as that is written, I'm not content. So are we content to write to the Department along those lines?
Yep.
Great. Next one is the Public Income and Expenditure Statement. Members are asked to note at page 295 a response from the Department to the Committee's request for details of funding held for emergency use by departments. The answer is it goes and sits in the Bank of England, and the Bank of England keeps the extra money. Are we content to note? Noted. 11.5, Negative Capital Expenditure 2020. Members are asked to note at page 298 a Department for the Economy response on negative capital expenditure confirming that this was largely owing to receipts from the Presbyterian Mutual Society. Jim, do you want to say?
I was on this committee when the vexed question of the Presbyterian Mutual Society arose, I think, in 2007. I was so glad I wasn't a Presbyterian, because you had to be a Presbyterian to invest in this fund. The fund, as you all know, went down, and we stepped in and provided a loan of £200 million. And I've been asking for an update. I think the sad reality is if it sat on the assets, we probably would be quids in at the moment and be selling them off at a considerable profit. I shudder to think what the people who bought the NAMA assets at have now accrued in terms of profit. That really would be frightening, and someday we'll give ourselves a shock when we see that. So it died a death as a subject literally for about a dozen years, and that's come back to haunt us. But my reading of it is that there is still a deficit here, that it has not all been recouped, and there's a difficulty as to what's going to happen, because there was a provision in the last year's budget, and there was a return of capital to the DFP. But looking at the sums, unless I got it wrong, is we're not going to get it all back. Is that my understanding of it?
Doesn't look like it.
I think, Chair, the Department for the Economy wrote to the committee a few months ago indicating that there were a number of savers who will not get all of their money back. There's I can circulate that again to members. We'll tell you that there was a few, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but there were a few hundred with not going to get a couple of thousand, and there were a smaller number that had much bigger sums, tens of thousands, that were not going to get their money back. But they'd received some money, but they won't get any more.
But why is it the savers taking the hit? I thought the idea of the £200 million loan was that the department, probably DFP, that was at one stage Detty, was going to take the hit. The departments took the. There
was a bit of a hit, but the idea was that the savers would get something, so they wouldn't get nothing. They would get a percentage of what their initial investment was. And I think, wasn't there a vote among the savers? And I think they did agree. And now we're just coming to the end of that process where the assets, I think, are now exhausted. And they're going to sell those to pay off what the department, some of the money that the department has put in. So I think the executive will still be down quite a bit of money. That's in RRI. The savers got something back, but there are a number who will have reasonably significant sums that they're not going to see again.
Yet the churches in South Down got almost everything back very quickly. So I wonder what was the criteria that some got. I know of two churches. One had 600,000 and the other had nearly £900,000 invested for its church building fund in the Presbyterian Region. And not only did they get it back, but the new buildings are up. They're built.
Can I recirculate the members that information? Because I don't have it off the top of my head, but there was information. It did sort of explain so that people who had, as I recall, people who had invested tens of thousands got pretty much all of the money back, but those who were on the really big end, the hundreds of thousands and mores, got 70 or 80% or whatever it was, but they would be short by tens of thousands of pounds. Don't have the figures in front of me, can recirculate the members and we can return.
Yeah,
but that principle didn't seem to be applied to churches, most of whom got all of what they had saved back.
I'm not sure. Off the top of my head, I can't recall.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Have we agreed to circulate? Great. Investing activity report. Members asked to note the Department's capital activity report for October, page 300. Are content to note?
Don't.
Content. Insulating concrete formwork building system. Members are asked to note a copy of correspondence from the Committee for the Economy. Thank you, Quiva. The Department, to the Minister of Finance regarding energy efficient building materials. Are we happy to note? Agreed. Composite request. Members are asked to consider the composite request on page 348. Is the Committee content that the composite request is an accurate and complete record of the Committee's information request? Is this agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Moving on to the forward work programme. Draft forward work programme is on page 367. Members are asked to consider correspondence from the DLO on page 370 asking the Committee of a change in the Minister's commitments and asking if the timing of the session with the Minister on the 17th of November could be changed. It is understood that the executive meeting is scheduled for
1 p.m. they told me.
Yeah.
So.
It is understood that the Minister is expected to be available in person at 13 or 15:30, though if proceedings of the executive run late, it is possible that he may not attend. It is also understood the executive will have to agree its draft budget by this time. It will not have agreed its draft budget by this time, and further briefings on this will therefore have to be arranged before the Christmas recess. Members, are we content to be flexible with the timing of the Minister's session? But could we also send a note to the Minister saying that the Committee would there are quite a few issues we would like to talk to the Minister on, and also it's been a while since he's been before us, and most other ministers have been in front of their committees more often than he's been in front of our committee.
Yes, Chairperson, I'll write to the Minister in those terms. Obviously from the Chairperson, just to remind members that to my understanding the Executive will not have considered its draft budget by that stage, so exactly what the Minister will tell us about budget I don't know, so we'll find out on the 17th.
Okay. Members are also asked to consider the scheduling of an oral evidence in respect of the Defamation Bill. The Clerk has shared the submissions to the committee stage with members via SharePoint. Preliminary arrangements for oral briefings have been made with members of stakeholders including Mark Hanna, Paul Tweed, Sam McBride, Olivia McCain and the Index on Censorship and English Pen. Is that right?
English Pen.
All right, okay. Are members content with these oral evidence sessions?
I think one suggestion I had that could plausibly be added is the NUJ.
They haven't written to us yet, so the idea is usually they write to us, tell us what they're going to say about the bill.
Okay.
Do we want to?
I think that there would certainly be. There's also the Society of Editors.
Again, I think we've written to both of them,
okay.
And they have not come back to us. And we have phoned them up and chased them, etc. Okay. So, but if the member wants to have a chat, if you have a contact and you want to have a chat with them, if they send something through, okay. I'm sure the committee will accept. So.
Okay. Are we content with these oral evidence sessions? Agreed. It's also stood that the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council will produce its report on the spending review on the 23rd of November. Subject to confirmation, is the committee content to schedule a formal oral brief on the 1st of December? Agreed.
Yeah.
It's also anticipated that the Fiscal Commission will produce its interim report before Christmas recess. Subject to confirmation, is the committee content for a scheduled formal oral brief on the 15th of December?
Wait.
Okay. Christmas drinks to follow. Yeah.
That's nice.
Are members content with the forward work programme as amended? Agreed. Any other business? Date and time of the next meeting, back in here on the 17th at 1400. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And
Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber. Programme